there's a contradiction entailed by having circular causation to whether or not grounding on that view is going to be transitive, right? If you watch the clip, the claims that they make, they shift, right? And Jack very clearly asked them, well, what was the contradiction? And then they delved into, Jack's motivations, whether or not Jack was interested in having a rational discussion. I mean, it's not like these people were going to derive a contradiction anyway.
Well, they claim to
But that,
have provided one after they removed me from the stage. And I don't remember exactly what they said. Maybe Detroyer. Do you remember?
I think they said something along the lines of within the set you would have
Wait, give me 1
two
second.
propositions.
Sure.
There's only two members, right? That's proposition number one. Proposition number two is there's only three members.
No, that they said that when Detroyer was talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something that they said right after.
Right.
There's something that they said right after they removed me from the stage. They were like, okay, well, now that he's removed from the stage, we can say what the contradiction is. Right. Now, I don't remember exactly what they said. Something about it being dependent and independent at the same time. Do you recall that?
I personally don't recall it.
Well, we can go back to the recording.
I think there was supposed to... I was... For the first part, when you were there, and at the end, when I just come in, I wasn't really listening very closely. But I think they were trying to get at something like, if there's a dependent thing as part of a circular chain of dependence, then it depends on itself, which means that it's like the sufficient condition for itself, which is just what it means for something to be independent or something like that.
I see. That's right. Yeah, I think that is what they're saying. Now, I'm not sure I really understand that argument. Like, even if you granted transitivity of causal dependency or whatever dependency is in question, it's not clear to me that there is a contradiction there unless they sort of frame independence in this, seemingly idiosyncratic way that we're not bound to accept, right?
Right. Well, I do think the dichotomy between dependent and independent is just a false dichotomy as well.
Right. So let's say you granted transitivity of dependence.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say in response to that kind of an argument?
Well, you need the other thing that if a thing depends on itself, then it's like independent, or at least not dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not obvious. I don't know, but if you grant that, then you'll get a contradiction.
Right. So when you say it's a false dichotomy, how would you? Let's say you granted transitivity of dependence. How would you sort of frame the kind of options metaphysically?
Yeah. So here's how I understand them to be using dependent and independent.
Mm-hmm.
An independent thing is, roughly speaking, something which has in itself its own reason for its existence, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly. I don't.
Yeah, that's really one of these. Yeah, this is one of these kind of mystical, obscurantist claims that you see in the history of theology that nobody seems to quite be able to explain. Okay, but go ahead.
That's not something I would say of anything, but whatever.
Right.
And a dependent thing is supposed to be... Oh, I see Lance is here, so we'll switch to that in a second. But
okay.
I think the way they're using a dependent thing is just something which doesn't have the reason... its reason for its existence in itself, or something like that, and it relies on something else for its existence, right? And it's just at the outset, that's just those aren't logical negations of each other. So you could think that something is dependent in the sense that it doesn't have its own reason for its own existence in itself, whatever that means, but also doesn't depend on something else. You might think the universe just exists, and maybe it's like a brute fact or something.
Oh, I see. Right. I see.
I mean?
So you're saying, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Right. Yeah, I was thinking along those lines myself. Yeah.
In other words, the dichotomy is, I think, smuggling in the sort of PSR.
Right, exactly. They're just ruling out brute contingencies. And so when they start appealing to those sets and stuff like that, or those composite objects, they're sort of illicitly, well, as you say, smuggling in the PSR. They're just denying that those things can be brutally contingent. They're demanding that those things require some further explanation.
Yeah, well, see, Lance is here, so we can.
Yeah,
we can,
I'll mute.
We can go on to discuss that. I invite you on stage, Lance, if you're there. But I think I got it. I can pin a link to the discussion, actually. All right, where is it here? Where do I find this?
Hey, can you hear me?
Can
people hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I just got out of another meeting that ended like 5 minutes ago, and I'm like scrambling to grab some food. So I'm just
fair enough. Yeah, take a few minutes if you want. I just I posted the link to the video at the top.
Meanwhile, Josh just told me that he's on Jefferson Spatchcock's channel reviewing EF's. You're reviewing Darth Dawkins' idiocy.
His blunder on the
his latest video, modus ponens.
Darth was apparently like incredibly upset today, probably partly because of that video being posted. So humiliating. And so he was just on a rampage going from channel to channel in politics and religion. Channels say he didn't have mods in, and demanding that people be muted or removed even though he didn't have mods in those channels. So I think his days at politics and religion are numbered, because when he gets in that mode where he starts issuing ultimatums, it's eventually just going to come up against, even Doobie's going to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah. I think, didn't Mary go in and
yeah, he went into a room where Mary had mods, All
right. Let's see here.
All right. How is my audio? Is it okay? I don't know which microphone is working.
It sounds fine. I think it's good. A little echoey, but
it should not be echoey. So let me work on that.
It's not bad.
Anyone know how to get into the audio settings on this club deck?
Yeah, let's see here. Settings. Yeah, I'm using Club Deck 2.
I got it. Never mind.
Yeah, right at the top,
the leftmost one. It does have the wrong microphone.
Yeah.
All right, is this better?
Yeah, nice.
Oh, right. Okay. All right, I'll set that. Although I'm still chewing, so I'm going to turn the mic off for that. But we could get started. How did you want to do this? Did you want to give your impressions of the discussion, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, so I guess we can sort of kind of recap it, I guess. So for people who are have joined the room but didn't watch it, there was Lance Bush here had a conversation on my channel yesterday with Eric Sampson, who's a moral realist out of, I think he said, Rhodes College. And Lance is at Cornell, finishing his PhD. Yeah, it was an interesting conversation. So the way it started off was on the moral semantics, and I don't think you guys had too much of a disagreement on that, really. Except, I mean, maybe he was a bit more optimistic about common sense realism, but I don't think you two are far apart on that. Or what did you think?
I thought his position was a little equivocal. It was hard to tell. So on the one hand, we seem to agree that the question of whether moral realism is true is not going to turn on whether or not ordinary people are moral realists or speak or think like moral realists. Like that's
Right.
maybe some evidence, but it's not going to be decisive either way. So I think we agree on that. We also definitely agree that the empirical evidence isn't conclusive in any particular direction. I mean, anybody that's familiar with that empirical research couldn't be a competent judge of it and then think it decisively favors realism or anti-realism. It just does not. So we agree on that. But a couple things. I'm a little puzzled as to why he still seemed to treat his position as some kind of default. And he certainly seemed to think it, like he seemed to say still that it was like a default or starting point. I believe I'd have to go over the discussion again and listen to it, but I'm not sure what that's based on. Like he brought up Frege Geach and he brought up these sort of considerations that would favor treating moral claims as propositional, although that wouldn't justify treating them as realist because relativists are cognitivists as well.
Right.
But we agree relativism. Right, but we would agree relativism isn't a very plausible semantic account of what most ordinary people are doing. The problem is that I don't think that you need to believe that ordinary, like folk moral discourse is committed to a particular anti-realist semantics. I would just deny that it's committed to a realist semantics. I don't think it's committed to any particular semantics. So I think that there's some maybe vacillation or failure to appreciate that criticizing anti-realist folk semantics does not get you realist semantics. There's a failure to appreciate indeterminacy as a legitimate position on the nature of folk discourse. So indeterminacy, for anybody that's listening, would just say, okay, when someone says something like murder is wrong, do they mean to say something that's intended to express a judgment about what's objectively right or wrong? Or do they mean to say that it's like it's wrong relative to their subjective personal standards or the standards of their culture? Or are they just expressing like an emotional state or a prescription or something like that? What the indeterminist says is there's no fact of the matter. They're not expressing any of those things. Or that like either there's no mental state accompanied by that determinately fits one of those, or that, I mean, basically just saying it's underdetermined. We're just not sure what, if anything, they're committed to. It could be any of those and we have no way of knowing. So that could be sort of, you could call that like epistemic indeterminacy, or it could be a more substantive indeterminacy where there really is no fact of the matter in principle. So like I've never seen someone draw that distinction. But the thing about indeterminacy is, to my knowledge, there is pretty much one paper that explicitly argues for indeterminacy. It's a paper by Michael Gill. I think he's at Cambridge now. He was at University of Arizona until a few years ago. He's a history of moral philosophy guy. And he wrote this paper called, I think, Indeterminacy, Incoherence, and Error. Not sure when, maybe 2007. It's not like an old paper, but it's not immediately recent. But that's like the only paper arguing for this. So this is, to call it a fringe view is an understatement. As far as I know, there's like two people on the planet that endorse indeterminacy, which is me and Gill. But that's it.
Wait, can I just ask a question?
Is it this paper, Incoherence and Variability in Metaethics? Go.
No, it's not that one. It's a different paper. I'm going to have to, maybe it's Indeterminacy and Variability in Metaethics.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Oh, I thought you said Incoherence.
Sorry, maybe I did. I meant to say Indeterminacy and Variability in Metaethics.
That's the paper.
Now, are you distinguishing incoherence and indeterminacy?
Yes, those are different positions.
So wait, what's the distinction?
Incoherence is, and that's a response in a book by John Doris, I think is the editor. It's a back and forth between Walterson and Armstrong, Don Loeb, and Michael Gill. And I think there might be someone else involved in that discussion too. I can't recall. I think there is. I think there's a fourth person. In any case, moral incoherentism is a view put forward by Don Loeb. And that view is that people, when they're making moral claims, have simultaneous but conflicting metaethical commitments. So they both intend to express, say, for instance, this is just an example of what would get you incoherence. They both intend to express a non-propositional attitude to the exclusion of expressing a propositional state, and they're trying to express a proposition rather than just express an emotion. Well, you can't do both. It's like someone saying that something has four sides and does not have four sides. And so what Don Loeb argues is that it could be that there's no way of explaining away as a result of mere conceptual error or it just being like a weird fringe view, these different kinds of commitments, that they could just be sort of embedded in the nature of folk moral thought and discourse in a way where there's ineliminable contradictions. And if that's the case, that would mean that folk moral discourse is incoherent. It's like if everybody were believing in square circles. That's incoherentism.
And indeterminacy?
There is either no fact of the matter or no way of finding out whether people have any determinate stance. So it's not that they're both committed. Sorry, 1 second. Someone's giving me an extremely annoying Facebook message invite. That is obnoxious. Okay. Oh, I'm still getting it. Okay. Indeterminacy is the view that there's no fact of the matter, basically. So there's it's not that they're committed both to A and not A. It's that there's no fact of the matter about whether they're committed to A or not A.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, like, to give an example, like the way ordinary people make causal claims, like it rained yesterday, I would say that it's indeterminate whether they're committed to any particular interpretation of quantum mechanics when they make those claims. It's not like they mean that in a Copenhagen sense or like a mini world sense. That's silly. Most people have never heard of that. It's not relevant to the way that they make causal claims. And so it's just indeterminate.
Yeah, because it's like, the common question is, what are the, metaethical presuppositions of everyday moral discourse? And the answer might be, it's varied, vague, or indeterminate, right? Like people might not really be making any metaethical or very many metaethical presuppositions, or they might vary in the presuppositions they make, either by person or interpersonally, as I think you've talked about it. So like maybe the standard assumption is just that like moral discourse has these presuppositions built in, and part of metaethics is figuring out what those presuppositions are. People argue for various forms of cognitivism or non-cognitivism or whatever, but that assumption just might be wrong, and the empirical stuff doesn't seem to support it anyway. That is true.
What you'll find with the empirical stuff is that people give a range of different answers, but you almost never get anybody consistently favoring realist type responses. The papers I'd recommend on that would be, the main paper would be Thomas Pulsar and Jennifer Wright's anti-realist pluralism paper. And what they found in that is that the vast majority of their respondents across multiple paradigms, so you ask them various metaethical questions in different sorts of ways, you give them analogies and metaphors and concrete questions. And so concrete would be like whether you're a realist or not about abortion and murder and like specific moral issues. And you could give them in the abstract. Across all those paradigms, they reliably found a significant majority of their participants favored subjectivism, cultural relativism, non-cognitivism, or error theory, and very few favored realism. Now, the problem with that is that my own research shows that people struggle to understand these questions, so they don't really know what they're being asked when you ask them these questions. So it might not be very indicative of them having a particular view. But if people don't know what they're being asked, that's still not much vindication of the presumption realists have, which is that people go around thinking and speaking as though like moral realism is just pretty much the way that they think about things. There's just no good evidence of that specifically. There's none of the studies can find that most people are realists about most issues most of the time. You're just not getting that.
Can I ask you another question? I don't want to take you guys off track from your review of the debate, but I guess this is relevant to how you're understanding realism. Because, I guess most people are going to understand... I think in the metaethical debates, it's usually framed in the field as presupposing some kind of categorical norms, right? Um, or what Parfit calls external normative reasons, or what have you. But I'm just kind of wondering about. It seems to me there's a kind of intermediate view, aside from like Kantian views, because I know there's a debate about whether Kantian or Kantian constructivist views qualify as realism or not. So I don't know how you're understanding those kinds of cases. But even apart from those, right, it seems like there's going to be something that looks a lot like realism in one sense, but anti-realism in another, which are going to be certain sensibility theoretic views where, a kind of projectivism about value would be rejected. And so value would be properties that are perceived in the world, right? So in that sense, it seems to be realist because those properties are taken to be there regardless of whether there are agents to perceive them, right? So they're not mind dependent or what have you in that sense. But then you could have a relativist version of that where there's no right or wrong way to perceive those properties. And so you'd have something that was kind of like realist in some ways and anti-realist in others. And so I'm kind of wondering like how, I'm just wondering if the kinds of research that you're interested in would capture a distinction like that.
So would this be like one of the components of something like quasi-realism?
No, I don't think so, because I think quasi-realists are projectivists. So this is going to be a form of moral sentimentalism or sensibility theory. I think these views are generally. I assume there are some affinities because I think sometimes some affinities with quasi-realism because I think sometimes moral sentimentalism, those kinds of ideas are traced back to the Scottish Enlightenment, people like Adam Smith and so on. But the key thing is that they're rejecting a kind of Humean projectivism. They're saying the value is in the world. It's not projected by the mind. It's perceived in the world. These are like properties. They're usually, I guess, understood to be non-natural properties. So it's a type of non-naturalism. And I think McDowell and Wiggins are sort of like the key figures in kind of developing or reviving this kind of view in, I think, the 1970s, maybe the 80s. So it seems like in those cases you're going to have, even apart from the Kantian cases, which also seem ambiguous, because in the Kantian cases you're getting something like universality without without it being an external normative reason. You're getting a kind of universal norm that would be something that all agents would be beholden to. And that looks a lot like realism in some ways, but some realists are not satisfied that that qualifies as realism. But I mean, this is another case where there's something that looks a lot like realism in some ways, but if you took a relativist version of it, you'd have relativism, which might seem to be anti-realism, but also something that looks like realism because value is something external to the mind.
Yeah, I would need to know more about these accounts to know how they might fit into the broader framework of what my interests are. But yeah, I would just need to know more about them. I just don't know enough
Okay, yeah.
about
Well, I mean, in any
Medallion
case,
and Wiggins.
if you're interested, I think if you just go to like something like I think there's an article on moral sentimentalism in the SCP, or if you just search moral sentimentalism, you can see like discussions of McDowell's and Wiggins' views.
The person that would be best equipped to address that sort of question would probably be Sean Nichols, because I think he has worked both on sentimentalism and on experimental philosophy of folk metaethics. So he would be like maybe the one person with the most knowledge of both areas. But yeah, that would be something to look into. There's all this stuff that sort of slips between the cracks of the conventional contours of the contemporary debates in metaethics. Most of the discussions I would be having would be with pretty run of the mill non-naturalist realists that are all sort of resurgent in the wake of Parfit. And then you're going to get this other strain of various types of naturalists. So you're going to get like the Cornell realists. There's a few
Right,
others.
exactly.
You're going to get like Harman and a few others that are going to have some unusual positions where they're like, relativism actually is realism. And, some of them, it's just going to be like annoying terminological stuff. At the end of the day, I'm not dogmatic or wedded to any particular way that we want to construe realism. What I specifically would deny is the notion that there are facts about what people should or shouldn't do, or that what is good or bad. So, what I would say are stance independent, normative, or evaluative facts uh, of any kind, whether moral or otherwise. I think that notion is just complete rubbish. There aren't any good arguments for it, and that's what I intend to reject. And then a lot of the questions are going to come down to precisely how we want to construe what that means, and that things can get weird if you dig into that. I think generally people have kind of left that stone unturned for the most part. There's a couple papers coming out trying to get into breaking down what exactly we mean by stance independence. And then, there's other areas, like another one that I'm not as familiar with and would like to know more about would be divine command theory and theistic accounts of moral realism. I haven't read enough of those. I don't know enough about them. And they probably figure into this picture somewhere too. I think the prospects for those are more plausible if your interest is in like human moral psychology, because that's more likely the sort of thing that would have uptake with a broader swath of the population. I don't think too many people are going to think in like Aristotelian terms, and I think a lot of the attempts to revive Aristotelian metaphysics are pretty weird, and it almost seems like people are bored and they're just trying to come up with something. Like, this is a very uncharitable characterization, so take it with a grain of salt. Like, I'd be willing to listen to sincere arguments for like weird teleology and weird Aristotle stuff, but that stuff just strikes me as just metaphysically, scientifically, and in many cases psychologically naive. It's just not about it. Like, we just have no reason to take that stuff very seriously.
Now, Detroyer, you can just stop me if I'm derailing. Um, and so with respect to the Kantian thing, there's going to be... Now, some people take it very far, right? Like people like Horsgaard, I assume, and other theorists like Alan Gaworth and Kant himself, right? There's going to be differences between understanding... I guess there's some kind of distinction between Kant's own view and what's called Kantian constructivism. But they're going to take it pretty far, right? They're going to want to say, yeah, torturing babies for fun and killing people that in cases where it's not self-defense or whatever is just going to be bad. But it seems like you could, and I take it you when you're talking about what you're rejecting there, what you just said about what you're rejecting, I take it that's going to capture those kinds of views. But I wonder whether you might think that there are some more modest norms that are built into practical agency, which in some sense could be said to be something that all agents are beholden to in virtue of being agents at all, right? I wonder whether you feel like you have to take a stand on that when you're saying, there's just no fact of the matter about what we ought to do, at least in the moral domain, or I don't remember exactly how you worded it, but, I think you may understand where I'm going with that question.
Yeah, so I just see non-instrumental goals and values as just brute facts about an agent. By that, I don't mean that they can't be like, you can reduce them to understanding like the neurophysiology and the causal history of why you have that. What I mean is that they don't require, and it makes no sense to ask for justification for them. So, like, for instance, if I created an artificial conscious being and I simply programmed it to have the goal, like, grow as many bananas as you can, that's just a fact about it. In the same way that, like, I have blue eyes or someone has 2 feet. It's just a fact about them. It would make no sense to say, like, justify why you have 2 feet or explain like why you have blue eyes. It's like the wrong sort of question. It's just not an appropriate question to ask. It's just a fact about whatever it is. And whatever physical constitution causes an agent to have the goal or desire that it has, that's just going to be another fact about it in the same way that eye color is. So what a lot of realists like Parfit are going to say is there are facts about what you should value, what goals you should have, what non-instrumental desires you ought to have. And that's part of what I'm rejecting. So when it comes to addressing, are there any facts about what like a rational agent would have to think? Like it would have to be something very basic at best. Like it would be some fact about like it recognizing and acting in accordance with an appreciation for the relation between its goals and its means of achieving those
Exactly,
goals.
yes. Yeah, that kind of thing. And there might be things that seem slightly more robust than that. Like maybe in order to be an agent, you have a commitment to learning something about the world because those kinds of facts are necessary for you to achieve your aims, or might be, likely to be required to achieve your aims. And so you'd have kind of an internal norm of that kind. But okay, that's fine. I think you may basically answered my question. Let me just sign off here, but for now. But just in case Detroyer, I assume you're purposely not letting Dog up, but just in case you aren't aware, he has a lot of questions. But maybe you're worried that he's going to go off the rails. So, but I thought I would at least ask you to ask him up in case you weren't aware. He says he has a lot of questions.
Yeah, I was aware. I don't know, maybe in a bit. Yeah. I don't know if you want to say anything more about this topic, Lance. Whether you think that like you can say things about what it is something. Sorry, what a quote unquote rational agent is committed to in virtue of being a rational agent.
Yeah, I would just add that I don't think that they're committed to having, like, you don't have to conform your epistemic practices towards optimizing for true beliefs. So, if you look at something like Stitch Fragmentation of Reason, I think that's a cool book. And ultimately, I end up coming down and favoring some type of pragmatism. And I don't think that there are stance independent epistemic facts either. I don't think it's a fact that if evidence makes it very likely that a certain outcome is true, that you therefore ought to believe that it's true, independent of whether it will promote your goals and desires to do so. And it's pretty easy to give an example. Like you could just say, look, imagine that you could adopt one of two different epistemic systems. One of those systems resulted in you having 100 true beliefs, but the 100th belief made you miserable and depressed. It was like an accurate assessment of how attractive you are to people or something like that. Or the other one is that it's 99 true beliefs about like stuff like don't walk off edges of tall buildings, things that are going to keep you alive. But then the 100th belief is a very mild and like you don't become like an absolute narcissist, but you think you're slightly more attractive than average, and that results in you being having, it's like passes a threshold so that you have a normal psychological well-being and it's not detrimental to you. I think most of us would favor the second one. Not that that necessarily makes it correct. My point there is just that I don't see anything irrational about that, and I don't think it's the case that you just have some sort of epistemic duty to always optimize for having true beliefs, independent of whether it would serve your interests. If that were the case, if someone wants to have this sort of externalist conception of rationality where I have to be rational even if it's detrimental to my goals and interests, I would just say I'm not interested in being rational. I'm just going to adopt the epistemic practices that achieve my goals. That's what I would do, and I recommend other people do that too. And I think that this is a pretty fundamental thing. And you get a lot of people like Parfit that want to sort of graft moral realism onto practical rationality, or try to say that it's somehow irrational to not be moral. I don't think in our discussion Eric was saying that. Now the thing is, if they want to push that it's irrational, I think that's going to start to give them problems. And it's the kind of problems I've raised with other moral realists, where they start to have a pretty funny and weird version of rationality, where rationality somehow requires me to do things that totally go against my goals and interests. In that case, maybe I don't care so much about being rational. Or if they don't say that, then, and this is something I didn't press Eric on, and maybe I should have done so, is, something I like to ask realists is, okay, so let's say I have all these reasons to do these moral things. Well, I just don't want to. I don't want to. Now what? Like, what happens? Because like God's not going to come down and strike me with lightning bolts. I'm not going to suddenly die. It's not going to undermine my life projects. Like, what are the consequences of this? As far as I could tell, on like a hyper super duper minimalist conception of realism, like Eric, where it's robust in a certain sort of sense, it's not robust in this sense. Like, there's no consequences. I'm not being irrational for whatever weight that would allegedly have. So who cares? Why would you want to do this? And I've never got a good answer from realists. To me, the kind of answers they give sound like dodges. So they'll say stuff like, "Well, it's maybe you don't care. You don't have to be moral, but you would be wrong. It's still true." And this is where the kind of realism that they're arguing for just strikes me as profoundly inert. It's just, who cares about this? And what they'll say is, I care, and most people care. We want to be moral. And it's like, well, I think they're just failing to be good humans and are failing to recognize that they'll be moral to the extent that that's consistent with their goals and desires, and they won't to the extent that it isn't. And at the end of the day, people are going to act in accordance with what they care about. And if I don't believe him that if the moral fact said, he had to kill his family, that he would do so. I think he says so much for morality. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, actually, that comes up at one point in the conversation. I did want to say a couple of things about what you just said, but Jack, did you say?
Yeah, I just wanted to. It sounds like what you're saying though is kind of compatible with something the Kantian could say, because I imagine somebody who had sort of Kantian motivations or leanings could say something like, "Well, yeah, the epistemic norms are grounded in an aim, which is not the aim of truth itself, but the fact that truth is conducive or likely to be conducive to realizing one's aims, right? But it would be no more than a pro tanto norm, and these other norms that you were talking about, what might be called pragmatic norms, like the desire to be happy or whatever, the norm of being happy because you have the desire to be happy, could trump that norm. So in that sense, you might imagine that the norm is the epistemic norms are universal in some sense, but they're just not categorical because they can be trumped by these other internal norms. So it sounds like what you're saying is compatible with that, right?
I mean, it's really going to depend what exactly you mean by universal. I mean, we could imagine hypothetical cases where, space pirates show up and say, if you employ this epistemic practice, we'll torture you and everyone else for eternity. So now I wouldn't want to employ it under those hypothetical conditions. So does that make it not universal?
Yeah, no,
well, it's still pro tanto, but
it's just going to be pro tanto, So it's just going to be the idea. Yeah, it could be overturned in a case like that. So I don't. Maybe what you're saying is not incompatible with what I'm suggesting, if that's the kind of example.
Yeah, but it doesn't just have to be epistemic norms. There could be sort of game theoretic optimums. So there's like, if I'm on an island and another person's on an island and we both have different goals, like I want to survive, they want to survive, and I have a certain set of resources and they have a different set of resources, there's going to be facts about how we can negotiate that disagreement that would optimize for the probability of me surviving and achieving my goals. And those facts are going to obtain independent of like what I want. There's just going to be facts about how to resolve conflicts. So if the U.S. and Russia get into a fight and they're in a state of conflict, there are going to be facts about what will de-escalate that conflict and what would lead to it worsening. So there's all sorts of facts about how to navigate conflicts and values, how to pursue our goals. It doesn't just have to be epistemic facts, and those facts are not going to depend on our goals and values. But it could just always be the case that one could have goals or values that just don't require them to do a particular thing. And that's what realists want. They want something really sticky, something that has a lot more oomph and authority than something that can just be washed away by the agent just not having the right kind of goals.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you as far as that goes.
I guess the idea, Lance, is that like a couple days I was asked, why should you be rational? And was a weird question because I kind of responded in this way where like, well, it's just kind of a weird question given that as an agent, like, I'm the kind of thing that where like I should be rational is kind of built into the idea of being an agent, So it's sort of like constitutive of agency that like that you operate on the basis of your own reasons, your internal reasons, your beliefs and desires. And so it's kind of a weird question to be asked, well, why should you be that way?
Sure.
I did want to say something quickly on this. Like, you might think that, okay, X's, whether we're talking about agents or something else, are the sorts of things that, it's a necessary condition to be an X to have a certain commitment of a certain sort. So maybe it is true that all agents, and it's like a necessary condition for being an agent that you have some commitment to satisfy your desires or something like that. But okay, you could imagine like a truth maximizer, where being a truth maximizer means you're committed, or at least, among other things, entails that you're committed to believing as many true things as possible. Like, okay, like we're just talking about, we're just categorizing things in different ways by the sorts of commitments they must have to count as a thing of that sort, right? We're not saying anything, I think, substantive about like what the moral or epistemic or otherwise normative facts are. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and this is something a lot of philosophers do, is they just want to engage in this sort of this philosophical musical chairs where they just want to move around terms and concepts and say, but if we define this to mean this, then this would be the case. And it's ridiculous because it's not changing any of the facts about what is the case. It's just changing how we're labeling things. And this argument by definitional fiat is just an incredibly annoying thing that philosophers do. And that is the kind of move people could make where they could just say it's constitutive of X that it has property Y. And okay, well, like you're just stipulating that, then sure. By X, you mean it's got to have property Y. Okay, but what if the thing I'm pointing to is not an X? I don't care. Like you would, and you haven't shown that it's an X, or there's a bunch of responses you can make to that. Just jangling around definitions isn't going to get you anywhere. And yeah, I think a lot of philosophers do that and think that that's achieving.
It sounds like based on this discussion that it's really internalism that is the sort of dividing line. That's sort of where you're drawing the line in the sand. It sounds to me like
as an internalist
about reasons.
Yeah, I'm not an internalist or an externalist. I'm a quietist about reasons.
I see. Okay.
So, like, I would not say that it's the case that if you have a motivation to X, you should X, or if you have a desire to X, you should X, or something like that. The normative and evaluative language, I think, is reducible to consistency relations. And that basically what I think is, and I'm also quietist about the reasons talk. I'm almost an incoherentist about what philosophers are doing with reasons talk. I think that the reasons talk in the literature is some sort of intellectual hallucination that they've caught themselves up in. They're just caught in the grip of using this word in totally bizarre ways. And I've had these discussions with other people before where, someone says, why did you go to the store and buy milk? I'd say, because I wanted milk or something like that. The reason is that I wanted milk. And so I could give an account of reasons where reasons talk is reducible to non-reasons talk. You could always sort of discharge reasons talk into something that doesn't require invoking reasons. So for instance, you could say, if you want to be healthy, you have a reason to not smoke. And what I would say is that we could break that reasons talk down into saying it would be consistent with the goal of being healthy to not smoke. We don't need to invoke reasons talk. And I don't know that internalists are sufficiently discharging that sort of thing. So I think we could just drop all of that talk in principle.
But it does sound like when you talk about non-instrumental norms versus instrumental norms that you're going to get something like the distinction between internalism and externalism about reasons.
I would have to hear the specific account of an internalist because some of them might just be fine with the kind of reduction I'm going for, and some of them might not.
Well, I'm just saying you're saying that there's no fact of the matter about what you ought to do with respect to non-instrumental, what's the term you use? Norms or goals, aims, something like that. And so that it seems like whatever, if you don't want to call that internalism about reasons, it's sort of tantamount to that, in the sense that that's sort of where you're drawing the line in the sand, right? Because it seems like what the externalist is going to be committed to is there are going to be fact of the matters about those things.
Yeah, typically when I argue about this, I position myself as being anti-externalist, and then I just don't really care very much about whether someone would want to call me an internalist or not an internalist. I just don't think that that's very important. Part of the reason is, let's say I just go, yeah, I'm an internalist. Well, normative realism is still bullshit. Or I'm not an internalist. Normative realism is still bullshit. And my position is very much I'm against realism. I think realism is the problem. I don't really care how people want to finesse things once we jettison that.
Right. What I'm saying is that what's constitutive of your idea of realism seems to be something like externalism.
There's going to be different ways people construe it, but I would say, yeah, more or less.
Yeah, I think I understand. I think I understand your position. I think I basically agree with you to that extent. By the way,
Right.
Detroyer. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I would say is, I'll often say there's no fact that we have a reason to do something independent of our goals and desires. But if pressed, I would just say there's also no fact that we have a reason to act in accordance with our goals and desires. I don't think we have reasons, in the sense that philosophers talk about it. I just this idea that we have reasons, I think, is just word salad. I don't know what that means. And this is what a big part of this discussion with Eric focused on. Philosophers are welcome to say, well, we know what it means and we can't explain it. But to me, they sound like a weird class of priests that think they have esoteric knowledge and we know what reasons are. But at the end of the day, I'm interested in accounts that allow me to make predictions, to make decisions, to practically guide my goal pursuits. That's the kind of models I'm interested in because I'm a pragmatist. I care about what's going to achieve my goals, and other people have their goals, and we're trying to navigate the world in pursuit of our goals. And what realists have on offer, these external reasons, is something utterly superfluous and disconnected from anything I can even conceive of caring about in principle.
Yeah.
And they could just insist they are real and just do whatever metaphysical mumbo jumbo they would want to do, and I would still say I don't care, and there's no reason why anyone else must care. And what they're trying to get out of people is that no, it doesn't matter what you want or care about. You must do this. You must act in accordance with this. You just must. There's just magical floating must. I don't must have to do anything other than whatever necessarily I end up doing. If I fall off a cliff and I'm going to die, maybe it's the case that I must die. That's a sense of must I understand, but I don't believe in a normative must. I don't know what that would mean. And it comes back to what I said early on, which is, what happens if I don't act with how I must? Nothing. There's no consequences to this. It's just empty. These are people that have somehow, philosophy has inducted them into a conceptual and linguistic framework that has caused them to believe in these sort of conceptual spandrels that are not connected to anything in the real world. It's the theoretical rubber never hits the practical road. It never makes contact with reality. It's just words about words about words about words. It's not about anything.
Yeah, I wanted to say
that's why you need some friction. Yeah.
I wanted to say there's a term for this type of objection to divine command theory, but I forget. But the idea is that if you want to ground the good or say that some function of God's commands, well then why ought I?
Cudworth's dilemma.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what's going on there, except on a non philosophy religion plane.
Detroyer, just to let you know, because you may not see it, I sent you Dog's question in DM. So in case you want to ask the question rather than let Dog ask it, you can decide whether you think it's a good question.
All right, I'll take a look at it in a second. I was going to say something else first, and then I lost my train of thought. One sec. I guess I'll take a look at this question because I had something interesting I want to bring up and I forget. I'm still not great at navigating this app. So here.
Yeah, the club deck.
If you go to the back channel, you'll see requests, because I think I haven't sent you a DM before. So it's going to be under requests. It won't be under the,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I see it. But also, I think I remember what I was going to say. What if someone, by must in the normative sense, all they mean is, when you say they must do Y, is that doing Y is the only means at satisfying their goals, something like that.
Sure, someone could say that there could be facts about that.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's common, but I think that's I don't know. I think I probably use must in that way sometimes too.
I probably do too. I mean, it's one thing to keep in mind is just that a lot of these words that philosophers are using, they're using them in very narrow technical ways, and they often strike me as somehow forgetting, they have selective memory about this, that these words have all sorts of colloquial meanings that are highly variable. Another thing though is, and it's not something I typically get into a whole lot of detail about because it just goes down all these rabbit holes. There's all this focus on the semantics of moral discourse, but like the meaning of moral claims, I don't even think is primarily about their semantics. I think I tend to take a very pragmatics heavy approach to meaning. I think meaning is holistically derived from the social context in which sentences are uttered, and that if we really wanted to understand what people mean when they're making moral claims, it makes no sense to talk about moral claims in the abstract. So, this will happen. If I had asked Eric for moral claims, and I didn't do this, so maybe this isn't being fair to him, but I have asked someone like Mike Humer, what do you mean by moral claims? They'll say stuff like abortion is morally wrong. Well, that's not an actual moral claim. That's like a simulacra of one. It's not a real moral claim. A moral claim is a thing that occurs in the wild. That's like if I said, show me some examples of dogs, and a person draws you a picture of a dog. That's not a dog. It's a picture of a dog. I'm willing to grant that, and it can certainly look like a dog, but it's not a dog. Moral judgments occur in the wild. And so if you want to know what people mean when they make moral claims, you'd have to study people in the wild, because all of the rich contextual factors relevant to what they're doing when they're making those claims need to be taken into consideration as potentially a feature of fixing what they mean. They're not a bug, they're a feature of the meaning of that. And so, a big part of this with when it comes to understanding moral thought and discourse is, what do people use moral thought and discourse for? What does it do? Well, it's not like people just go around as truth spouting machines. Like, no one's just walking down the street and then they're just like, abortion is morally wrong without any that's ridiculous. No one would do that. So why would a person be saying abortion is morally wrong? Well, when would a person say this? A person might be saying abortion is morally wrong when they hear about someone getting an abortion, or when they're at a pro-life rally or something like that. And so then we can say, well, why are they doing that? Why are they doing it in that context? Why are they expressing a judgment? Well, notice, is this person going to speak more loudly when they're around friends and family that agree with him? Yeah, probably. Why would they do that? Well, they're probably signaling their allegiance and association and agreement with their group. And so part of the function of that moral utterance is to say, hey, my team, I'm on your side, go team. And hey, that other team, boo, that team sucks. That is a constitutive feature of the purpose of that moral utterance. And that's not an aberrant usage. It's a part of the feature of moral judgments to signal one's allegiances to their allies and their colleagues and the people they want to promote, and to condemn people that they don't like. And you would find this. Do people selectively reason about morality and apply double standards? Will they say it's okay for their side to be honest and not okay for the other side to be honest in different contexts? Like they might not consciously entertain that at once. Are they going to just apply double standards? Absolutely. Now, moral philosophers will look at that and go, wow, that's like a bias. That's like an error in the people judgment is to promote your allies and get your enemies' asses kicked. And so when philosophers are doing all this semantic analysis and they're taking these statements like murder is wrong, these are toy examples. They have nothing to do with real moral judgments occurring in the real world. And whatever judgments they make about that are almost totally irrelevant. They just have nothing to do with what morality is actually like or about or for. And this carries over into moral psychology, where they just take what moral philosophers say and then throw that at non-philosophers. Taking a survey on Qualtrics on Amazon Turkey, getting 20 cents to do it, where this person like doesn't give a shit and they're watching like Witcher or something while they're answering these questions, and they think that has anything to do with people's actual moral decisions in the real world. Maybe it has a very, very little bit to do with it, but there are very serious methodological problems in what we're even taking to be the data that we're working with. Moral judgments? What the hell is a moral judgment? Which moral judgments? Are the moral judgments philosophers talking about representative of the kinds of moral judgments people make in the real world? Because moral philosophers are going to tend to be almost exclusively concerned with a narrow subset of ones that they are habituated to talk about, like torturing babies for fun is wrong. How many people are seriously deciding whether they need to torture a baby or not? It almost never happens. So like there's just something very fundamentally wrong with the way that philosophers are approaching these questions.
Is part of the issue here that like people are sitting back and thinking, okay, there's all this sort of quote unquote moral discourse going on, discourse involving certain stereotypical moral vocabulary, and they think they can abstract from that certain, because there's like sentences being said with the same terms, that there is a claim being made or something that you can look about at the sort of public meaning of or something, and we can ask about that, like when people say that murder is wrong. Or I mean people sometimes do say that killing is wrong, or I mean maybe I'm missing the issue here.
The issue is that philosophers are taking as the sort of material they're working with to start building the theories on a bunch of like degenerate images of the real thing rather than the real thing. It's like trying to study the anatomy and physiology of a dog by looking at like hand-drawn images of a dog that you came up with and your friends came up with. Not even hand-drawn images of like canine specialists. It's just the stuff you could come up with when you're sitting in your house and you haven't looked at a dog in a while. This is the kind of data that philosophers are dealing with. And then they're saying, okay, so I've got all these moral sentences, and now like, oh, look at this. You can embed moral claims in arguments. So you could say like, murder is wrong. Assassination is a type of murder. Therefore, assassination is wrong. Frege Geach problem. This is a problem for you cognitivists. And, non-cognitivists. And it could turn out like if you went out and studied what people were doing when they were making moral claims, and you're like, look, the Frege Geach problem, non-cognitivism is clearly false. And like every single person looked at you and said, are you an idiot? Of course, I'm just expressing my emotions. And then like, now what are you going to do if you're like, yeah, but we can embed moral claims in argumentative structures, and that shows that they have to be propositional? You're just wrong. And what it would turn out is that there's a semantics to it where that makes sense when you look at it, but the meaning of the moral claims is driven by pragmatics and subtext and features unrelated to the semantics. And that's just that the language is used to mean a thing. So like, for instance, just to give an example, what if I started a trend of saying it is a propositional like claim that 2 + 2 = 4, and I just use that to mean that like I hate ketchup or something, like ketchup, ugh, and I just get everybody to start doing that. It would be really weird for a philosopher to take that and say, well, clearly the claim is it's like a propositional claim about math or something, because like look at the semantic content of it. That's stupid. The semantic content is totally irrelevant, like by design. It's just not intended to convey what it looks like it's intended to convey. So what you would actually need to do if you wanted to understand the meaning of that sentence is to look at the context in which the sentence is used. And philosophers simply don't do that at all. They don't look at the context in which people would say abortion is morally wrong. They just extract it from the context and only look at the semantics and then think they're going to figure out what people are thinking and doing without looking at the context. It's idiotic. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a bit of a sidetrack, but I've never really felt the force of the Frege-Geach problem, to be honest, because like the fact that you can take some sounds or characters or whatever and fit them into like an argumentative structure, and as if it's like you're making inferences, that doesn't mean that the things you're putting in there themselves have semantic content. That's something you need to determine after the fact or before the fact. I mean, that's an additional fact.
Yeah,
you put gibberish in there and perform, give an argument. Like, God, what's the problem?
Yeah, I never felt the force of it either. And the example, my go-to example is, look, I could say stuff where this is literally all I think about. Like I'm like a monomaniacal lunatic that only talks and thinks about this pretty much all day. And I say stuff like that cake was delicious. And if you ask me what I meant, what I was not, I'm certainly not a gastronomic realist trying to say that the cake had the property of deliciousness independent of how it tastes to anybody. That's stupid. I'm not saying that. I'm not even a subjectivist about it. I am not saying like it was consistent with my gastronomic preferences to consume this cake or something. That's a weird thing for me to say. I'm expressing an emotion. I'm saying, yeah, this cake, fuck yeah. It means the same thing to me. Like I'm literally using a propositional claim to express an attitude. I'm in that moment being a gastronomic non-cognitivist. Now you could then say, all cakes are delicious. This is a cake, therefore it's delicious. Frege Geach. So I guess I must be wrong. But that's stupid. Nope. I'm a non-cognitivist about some of my deliciousness talk and my gastronomic talk. And you could, the fact that I could take the sentence that I used and plug it in to an argument does not negate that. So screw that problem. I don't think. I mean, maybe that's just the dumbest ham-fisted way of trying to deal with it ever. But if there's a problem with that, I want to run into somebody that has, and I'm being sincere here, like more experience with philosophy of language, like why that would be a problem. Because as far as I could tell, that just immediately eliminates the problem. Like I just do use non-cognitive language that seems to that it could be fitted, ratcheted into that form.
Like, I mean, like suppose whenever someone got hurt, instead of saying "ow," they said "that hurts," but really it's an utterance doing the same work, right? They're just, instead of saying the sound "ow," they're saying "that hurts," right? Okay, and you could say, "Oh, but look, that hurts. We can treat that propositionally. Maybe we can, this is conditional. If that hurts, then blah blah blah." And you can make a bunch of inferences or look like inferences out of it. And so that must mean that what's being expressed by that sound, that utterance, is propositional, is contentful. But it isn't, right? We just stipulated a case where it isn't, and that this sort of argument is permitting the inference to content there, which is just wrong, right?
Right. Yeah, that's doing that. Yeah, exactly. And that's maybe a stronger case than what I'm doing because I'm just reporting that I intend to do that. But I could just stipulate that moving forward, I'm going to say that is delicious to express my attitudes. And like now I am stipulating that is what I mean. I get to decide what I mean. And then I could use that language. And then again, you could do the Frege Geach thing and then say, it's a problem. So like we have clear counterexamples that show nope. And this is actually, this ratchets right into my point, which is that what you would need to do is look at the context of the utterance. What am I using in the language to do? Not what happens when I sit in a room and write a paper about this. And this is a systemic problem I have with philosophers is they make all these claims, empirical claims about what people mean and how people think and all this stuff. And they don't do, most of them don't do any of the empirical work to actually find out. And they don't even read empirical work other people do. And when people do empirical work, they're like really annoying about it and they keep saying it's not relevant. I mean, it's relevant when it helps them and it's not relevant when it doesn't. There's just something deeply weird about the way that philosophers engage with disciplines outside of their own. They'll recruit it when it helps them and they'll deny it when it doesn't. And to me, it looks very much the way that I see many Christian apologists work, is they'll draw on science whenever it helps support, Jesus got resurrected. Oh, look, scientists say that whatever, the Shroud of Turin is real. Like science works when it helps them, but it's bullshit when it doesn't. They do the same kind of thing with science.
Yeah, I think part of what's going on there in the figure Geach is that, like, look, the fact that you have some utterance, which in certain perhaps structural respects or other syntactic respects resembles other utterances that we sometimes make to express, meaningful statements, doesn't mean that the fact that the initial utterance is also used to express a meaningful statement, even if it can be used in ways like you can construct what looks like an argument out of that utterance, in the way that you would normally with a meaningful statement. Doesn't mean that this statement is also meaningful. It just doesn't follow. You still have to figure out what that utterance is being used to express.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's just right.
And that's just like an empirical question that Frege Geach isn't going to solve. So anyway, I don't know if you want to move on to. There is something else. This might be jumping to later on in the discussion, but it is something I wanted to bring up because you sort of already said something related to this. And I'm going to get to Dog's question in a bit also, but because at one point when we were in the audience questions, and a couple of people had similar questions. I think Darwin's Greatest Hit had a question like this, and someone else did as well, which was that someone asked him about Zorpian facts, and someone else asked him, like, well, if you discovered that the moral facts sort of differed significantly from your desires and commitments, would you act in accordance with the moral facts? And effectively, he said that, I mean, within reason or something like that. And that all that means, I'm just taking that to say, like, well, if the moral facts agree close enough with my commitments, then I'll, act in accordance with those. But if they don't, then I'm going to act as I was going to anyway. And then it's not that they're completely inert, because he does want to say that he'd change his behavior at least somewhat away from how he otherwise was committed to act. But, it doesn't exert much force on him, at least. So I don't know. What did you think about that, or what he said there?
Yeah, I think that he does have a potential out, which is to say that there's a couple things he could say. One is that I guess there would be three things he could say. The first would be that if I'm saying, hey, would you commit genocide if it turned out that the moral facts say that you have to commit genocide? He could say that I'm engaged in the same kind of rhetorical move that I'm criticizing realists for when they say, like, do you think it would be objectively wrong to, murder babies or whatever? And I want to say no, because I don't think it's objectively wrong. But it pragmatically implies that I'm saying that it's not wrong to, murder babies. And I don't want to say that. So it's almost like a loaded question where it's hard to say, the best answer is, I do think it's wrong. I just don't think it's objectively wrong, instead of just saying yes or no. So when someone asks you a sort of compound or complicated question where they're embedding one implication behind something that's sort of super, like, technically the question is asking one thing, but the subtext is that it's asking another, that's kind of an unfair question. So he could object that I'm asking an unfair question that puts him in a position where rhetorically it would look bad for him to say yes, but he still wants to say yes. And that's fair. I do think that's fair, and I do think I would have to grant that. So the second thing you could say is, if it's asking a weird question, because it's asking a question like, what if it would maximize utility to, like, torture people? Would you, if you're a utilitarian, would you favor torturing people? A utilitarian is kind of committed to saying yeah, but they would have to say something like, well, just imagine what it would take to convince me of all the non-moral facts that would make that be true. Like, it would be really weird, and it's hard to imagine what that would look like. And so it sounds like I'm biting a big bullet to say that, but, like, I'm not. My position is I want to maximize utility. If you just stipulate by that, like, suppose torturing everybody would maximize utility, would you do it? Yes, but, like, assuming that that's, like, possible, like, and like, I don't know what the facts would have to be for that to be a reasonable thing to think. They would have to be really weird, and it's hard to imagine what they would be. And if I could imagine them, then sure, I guess that's what I would do. And then the third point would just be a sort of epistemic concern, which is if the facts deviate too far from what my intuitions tell me is a plausibly correct moral theory, I would have a sort of proportionate increase in my uncertainty about whether that's really the right thing to do. So I don't take too much issue with a moral realist saying something like, suppose the moral facts say that you have to be like friendly to people generally. Would you do that? I think that it's fine for them to go, sure. And then what if they say you have to torture everyone forever? For them to say, well, I would be less confident if like the moral fact machine spat that out and said torture everyone forever. I could see why a person would say, for epistemic reasons, I'm more reluctant to do that. So I think they have several answers they could give that would be pretty good answers.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but if someone were to say that, like, they just wouldn't change their behavior at all if they found out the moral facts, were different than they otherwise thought that they previously thought they were. I mean, then they're just effectively saying that the moral facts are just entirely untethered from what they think they should do, in a sense, or what they like have reason to do. I mean, how do you even make sense of that as an account of moral facts?
Well, you do have naturalists that just say, look, moral facts are facts about what promotes well-being and suffering. And some of them are just not even going to bother to give this an account of, like, they could just say, if you don't care about that, okay, too bad. That's what's good and bad.
What do you
So there are realists that try to push views like that.
What do you think about the sort of response? Because when I was a theist, people would ask me, "What if God commanded you to do, all these crazy stuff?" I would say I would think that's what I should do, but I think I would fail to do it nonetheless. Like I would just be psychologically disposed to fail or something like that. What do you think about that kind of response?
Can you give that to me again?
Yeah. So if someone gave you these crazy seemingly reductios, like, oh well, if God commanded you to murder your family or kill your family rather, would you do it? It seems like that's good on your view if you're a divine command theorist. What I used to say was that yeah, that's what I should do, but I think I would find myself failing to do it, um, just because I'm like psychologically disposed to failing with respect to that norm or something like that. What do you think about that kind of answer?
Yeah, it seems like a debater's move. Like it's just a way of biting the bullet, but like saving a certain degree of like sounding a little less preposterous. I'm not really sure that that's doing much philosophically for their view, because they're kind of reporting a philosophical conclusion and then also just reporting a psychological fact independent of their philosophical position. And what's on trial is the philosophical position, not their psychology. So just who cares if they wouldn't do it?
Yeah. All right. So I did want to get to Dog's question. It's a bit long here, but so he says, in the debate, Samson said that making predictions is exclusive of natural things, but morality is non-natural. If this is the case, wouldn't Occam's razor dictate that we should just eliminate non-natural things from our ontology, since we neither know them by acquaintance, like phenomenal consciousness, nor infer them from experience, like structural properties or external objects, since they neither make predictions nor are indispensable to scientific or logical discourse like math is? I can be a fictionalist about all of normativity, even epistemic, and it wouldn't negate any of our theories about science, math, and logic. I can think of some of the things a realist is going to say is that they would eliminate some of the things that are moral theories. But then you can understand what the data is. I mean, do you kind of understand the question there?
Yeah, and that's more or less where I'm coming from with this stuff. So I think the basis that an anti-realist has for being an anti-realist is ultimately going to be an abductive argument. What they're going to say is, look, when you're trying to offer an account of what the world is like, our best explanations just don't posit there being these stance-independent moral facts. I think maybe that's something I should have pressed in the debate more. I mean, I wasn't really trying to think of it as a debate. I was trying to have a discussion. It got a little debatey, I guess. Is that they're adding sort of it's not an extra theoretical posit in terms of a conventional empirical theory, but it's conceptual deadweight. It's this like extra concept they need to add. And so, I don't study philosophy of science. I'm not a specialist, but in that area, but I would have thought that the more primitive concepts you could eliminate from your account of the way the world is, generally speaking, the better. It seems to me that having to posit extra unanalyzable concepts is a pretty significant theoretical cost that a non-naturalist realist has to pay for their account. I mean, they're basically saying there's something about they either have to say there's something about the world we can't explain without appealing to these facts, which I just think is not true. I think we can explain it without appealing to non-natural moral facts. Or I don't even know if this is what he was saying, that they're not intended to explain anything. In that case, what are they for then? Like it just almost becomes an alien way of viewing the world to me. I don't think in those terms. So they're not describing anything. They're not the best explanation for any particular set of observations. What are they doing then? Like, what is their role in our ontology? And as far as I can tell, they don't have any role. So yeah, they seem completely superfluous to me. So yeah, I don't know what non-naturalists are doing, but this is one of my concerns, which is that, if I said we could jettison them from our our accounts of the way the world is, what I find that realists will do is they'll say, no, you're missing something from your account of the way the world is. You're missing the moral facts from your account. And then it's like, hold up, wait, whoa. So are the stance independent moral facts, are they intended to explain certain observations we have, or are they the thing to be explained? Are they the explanandum or the explanans? I don't know which they think they are. Sometimes it seems like they're both, and that they are the explanation for themselves. Why are there moral facts? Because there are moral facts. But they're certainly not going to say that, because that would make it like that. That would be an obviously silly thing to say. But so then what are the observations they're trying to explain? I would love to hear what they say, but if it's like our moral intuitions or like realist phenomenology, then we've got something. So okay, there's a certain set of observations we have. It appears that some people, whether it be ordinary people or 62% of academic philosophers, appear to either have intuitions that moral realism is true, or intuitions that certain claims are true that entail moral realism, like that torturing babies for fun is objectively wrong or something like that. Or they have like a phenomenology, like they experience the intrinsic badness of suffering or something like that. So it could be intuitions, inferences, or some type of phenomenology. And so you take those observations or that data, and then you say, what's the best explanation for those? The existence of stance-independent moral facts. That explains them. So if they want to go that route, that's fine. That's at least marginally intelligible to me. But then the question would be, is it in fact the case that stance-independent moral facts are the best explanation for those things? And I would say no. And at the very least, let's say they're right. At the very least, one theoretical advantage that anti-realists have is that they don't have to posit the existence of an extra type of fact. So stance-independent moral facts are the conceptual equivalent of, epicycles. They're this sort of extra thing you have to posit if the resources already available to both you and the anti-realist can't get the job done. And I just think anti-realist resources can get the job done. And so we know it ends up just being superfluous from an explanatory perspective. But if that's not what non-naturalist realists want, if it's not intended to explain their phenomenology or whatever, if they want to explain the moral facts, that just seems just obviously question making, because I'm denying there are moral facts to explain. So I don't know what they're trying to do. Maybe that's clear to people that have listened to the debate. I'd have to go back and listen to it again.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was wondering if it's sort of a related problem. I forget what it's called or who was arguing for it, but like for certain forms of non-naturalism, like there's this like modal concern or maybe skeptical concern that like if what the moral truths are is entirely like independent of the natural facts, whatever those are exactly, then maybe this is an epistemic concern. Like, why think that what we think that moral facts is actually what they are, because there's nothing presumably in the natural world or in whatever we have epistemic access to, presumably, that would tell us what those are or not. The world could be precisely the way it is from as far as we can tell, but the moral facts could be something entirely different in principle. Do you think that's a serious problem for at least for certain forms of non-naturalism, or what do you think about that?
I'm not sure I know quite what the concern would be.
So the concern is supposed to be, I guess it's the best phrase as an epistemic concern, which is that look, this, we can talk, as a way of speaking in terms of like possible worlds, right? There's some possible world in which the facts of the world, of the natural world, say of the universe or whatever, are precisely the same as they are in the actual world, but the moral facts are very different, right? Because the moral facts are just these non-natural facts that don't depend in any way on what the natural facts are like, and we don't really have a way of telling which of those two worlds we're in, because all the stuff that we can appeal to are those sort of, the natural facts, the stuff in the universe that we have epistemic access to, and we don't know which of those two worlds is the case, right? That where the difference is the moral facts. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could ask this question, like, suppose there weren't moral facts, what would the world look like? Would there be any surprises? Would
Right.
there be anything different about the world? And I can't think of many. The only one that really occurred to me when I thought about this before was that moral realists would say, well, it's surprising that a bunch of smart people that have thought about it a lot have become moral realists if it turned out moral realism wasn't true. So that would be like one observation in the anti-realist world that would be surprising or weird if anti-realism is true. Uh, I don't think that's a very strong one, and I don't like. It doesn't look to me like there's much in the way of observations or like a publicly available facts that would weigh in favor of realism. It looks at best undecidable one way or the other. Um, but I don't think they're going to impress any non-naturalist realists with that. And they're just what I think that they're just going to keep doing is appealing. At least a lot of the ones I talk to. I mean, it's so many people now. Is this phenomenal conservatism move? I noticed that Eric did this. One of the last discussions I had with Matthew did this. Uh, I'm seeing it more and more in online forums and on Facebook and in people discussing this elsewhere. They've really just taken Hume's phenomenal conservatism and run with that. And instead of saying, here's all the public arguments I've got. So like notice in that discussion with Eric, he did not present a single publicly valuable argument for moral realism. He didn't present the moral argument like from God. He didn't present companions and guilt arguments. He didn't present anything like that. The whole thing came down to phenomenal conservatism. It came down to this. It seems to me like moral realism is true, and I'm justified in believing that unless you can give me defeaters. Too bad. And you can't give me defeaters, so I win. So, now that I'm starting to make this move, and by the way, this is something I wanted to point out. I said that the indeterminacy is a fringe view, and that might be true. And by fringe, I don't mean that it's like wrong or like a crackpot view, just an uncommon view. The relevance of the empirical findings to these questions are being increasingly recognized. If you go on the Stanford Encyclopedia page for moral relativism, you'll now see that there's a couple sections, one on mixed views about metaethics and one on experimental philosophy, discussing the like more recent research. So this stuff is starting to make it into mainstream places. Anyway, I think I lost my train of thought with that digression because I forgot and mentioned that. What was I saying before that?
Phenomenal conservatism and all that.
Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you. So this phenomenal conservatism. Notice what the person is doing. I give these analogies, and this is one of the most frustrating things I've had in debates with moral realists. Is I think I spotted an instance where it wasn't clear whether Eric was treating moral facts as the observations that we need to explain, or as serving the explanatory role for some set of observations that were not themselves moral facts. I wasn't clear on if it was either one of those or something else. I just wasn't clear on what the claim was, but it looked like there might be a problem there. But what you'll notice is, what I was saying is that he didn't give any public arguments. There, like in other words, arguments that would serve as reasons for an anti-realist that does not have realist intuitions to endorse realism. Because, I don't have the intuition God exists, but if you give me like compelling arguments that like logically it must be the case that God exists, and I feel the force of the argument, I'm just going to have to agree with it. It doesn't matter if it feels to me like God exists, or if someone says, I could beat you in chess, and they sit down, I don't believe them. They could play chess and beat me, and they could show that. So like I could see that I just lost the game. It's not private information like someone saying I saw Bigfoot, so you got to believe Bigfoot is real. But when I give those sorts of points, it doesn't. And this is pretty much every realist I've talked to. They never seem to make any concessions or acknowledge points that count against the view. And part of it is just that they've retreated to a position, at least the ones I talk to, where the position just comes down to, seems to me like it's true, and I'm going to keep thinking that it's true unless you could show me that how it seems isn't how it is. And that's like kind of just epistemically just never sticking your neck out. It's presenting such a small target and then demanding you hit a bullseye that they're just setting up conditions where they could just go around strutting, saying, look at my view, no one's ever getting a bullseye on it. No blows ever land. Yeah, because you're not presenting a target. Your view is, it seems to me like it's true, show me why I'm wrong. Well, now, like, if you want to do that, I'm going to have to do this, like, a bunch of empirical work to show that there's like some psychological cause for why you think that I can use as an explanation, in lieu of it being true. Like, in other words, like you have some bias or some unreliable cognitive process that causes you to believe that, rather than you believing that because it's true. The problem is that if you look at someone like Humer will say, and he says this on his blog post, that he basically has put to 100%, very close to 100% prior, not exactly 100%, but like approaching 100% on like torturing babies for fun is wrong, being objectively wrong, being true. And so, if you're gonna be a Bayesian realist, phenomenal conservative person, what you're doing isn't simply saying it seems true, but like moral realism seems true, but like it's defeasible, and you could give me reasons, and then I could be convinced it's not true. The realist can say something, and Eric said something similar to this. Is you could say something like, any amount of evidence that I accept is never going to be more plausible than it being true that it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun. And what you've ended up becoming is not a phenomenal conservative, but a phenomenal dogmatist. You're just committed to realism being true. And no evidence in practice could ever be adequate to overturn that. So you could just go around saying, no one has ever given sufficient defeaters to overturn my view. Well, sure, but that's trivially true of any, asymptotically approaching one prior that someone puts on anything. I could just say, look, I believe Bigfoot is true. Give me defeaters. And you could say, well, if, destroy the entire Earth, there's no more Earth. Well, Bigfoot escaped in a space shuttle 1,000 years ago. You can't disprove that. And my prior that that's more likely than that Bigfoot is dead is so high that I'm still justified in believing that. That's actually true if you're going to be a strict Bayesian. Like, if your prior is that high, you are justified in believing that. But you got a stupid prior. But like, so what if I can't convince someone that has weird priors? And that's effectively where non-naturalist realists are retreating, is to just say, I've got a super high prior, fuck you. That's their position. That's it. That's their position. I'm super duper 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 confident. So now it's your job to convince me otherwise, and nothing you say is ever going to be good enough, so fuck off. That is what the position amounts to now.
Yeah, that is a concern. I think one thing, I don't know if you said this or maybe I mentioned this, is that like that person really isn't part of the sort of public discussion then, right? They're just going to say, I mean, I guess they could still say, comment on arguments and other positions that are being made. But for people who are, honestly sort of willing to be moved on this matter, they're not really, like, there's just no point in them from really even taking part, right? If someone just said, I'm going to believe that the sky is green no matter what, then what point is including them in part of a, some sort of investigation or some sort of theory comparison on whether the sky is green, why even include them in that conversation then?
Right.
You get what I'm saying here?
Yeah. And so this is what concerns me. why are they having public discussions if this is the kind of argument they're going to be using? What they're having a public discussion to basically say, I super duper believe something, and if you want to show that I'm wrong, you're going to have to present arguments to convince me I'm wrong. And like, I'm nearly 100% sure of this. And again, Eric wasn't saying this is like Mike Humer. No one's ever going to convince Mike Humer. But what he's going to do is just go around saying, instead of saying it's true and like we all have to believe it's true, like, you know, we all have to believe like evolution is true because the public evidence for it is so good, and if you don't, you're wrong. That's not even the move that he seems to be making. To be fair, Humer does make publicly valuable arguments. He, you know, has the argument from convergence. He has this ontological argument, so he does have arguments. But you know, if those arguments all fail, and I think those arguments are all very, very unconvincing, this is going to be their like final refuge, and their final refuge is I super duper think it's true, and there's enough of us who super duper think it's true that like we have some kind of advantage in virtue of our shared expertise. And this is where I think Eric went, and this is where I'm seeing more and more realists go. I'm not sure why they're going this direction, because I would have thought they would think that their arguments are better than they are. So like, I'm not seeing people like in the last few discussions, I haven't seen anybody throw the Comanians and Guild argument at me. Maybe they realize that the argument sucks. But like, this is a pretty recent argument that's entered the stage, but it's a bad argument. So if they don't have those, their last refuge is just basically saying, we've got the majority on our side. 62% of philosophers are moral realists. We're experts at the topic. We're super duper smart. Most of us think this is true. And so now the onus is on you to show that we're wrong. Why would so many of these smart people be wrong? Prove we're wrong.
Right. Yeah. Does everyone bring something else up that came up in the discussion, which was that like Eric made this point at one point, which is that, well, you can't really think that these moral realist claims are gibberish because, how do you put it? Because you understand like what reasons are and what it means for things to be stance independent. So you know what there was a way he put it, but like
I'm just giving some. If I recall, he said something like this. He's like, Lance, there's a tension in what you're saying because you're both claiming that the view is unintelligible and that it's false, and that seems contradictory. Or if not contradictory, at least like it's a little weird to say both. Because if I said, hey, Zoobles exist, it would be weird for you to go, I have no idea what that is. I think it's gibberish and they don't exist. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I think there was some part of the conversation where you said something like that.
Yeah, I don't think my answer to that was very good. The first thing I would say is that what I said, well, like part of it was technically accurate about my view, but I still think I kind of fumbled my response to that a bit. What I would say is, first of all, it is technically true that depending on the type of realism you're talking about, some of them are false, some of them are trivial, and some of them are unintelligible. So like someone could just do an argument by stipulation and just say, by moral facts, I'm referring to facts about what promotes happiness and suffering. There are facts about what promotes happiness and suffering. Therefore, there are moral facts. So like some stupid Sam Harris kind of thing. If someone says that, they're doing the thing we talked about, a while ago, which is this like argument through like linguistic fiat, where they're just trying to just redefine words to try to get their position to be true. In that case, it's not false that there's facts about what promotes happiness and well-being, and it's not unintelligible. So I can't say it's false or unintelligible. What I have to say is it's trivial. Sure, there are facts about what promotes well-being and suffering. Now what? Like, it doesn't follow that like I have to promote well-being and suffering, that I must do so, that I have a reason to do so. So like those kind of accounts that end up just saying moral facts or a certain boring kind of descriptive account are just totally superfluous. Like they're just trivial. They're just, hey, we're going to use a word to refer to a thing you already thought existed. We're going to use a word for that. We're going to call it moral. Ooh, like who cares? And they might end up having something with a little more substance. They might say, well, this is what most people are like unconsciously getting at or targeting or trying to refer to when they make moral claims. Okay, interesting. Those are going to be empirical claims. Naturalists almost always do a shit job at capturing what people like. They don't even look at any moral psychology. They just are like think in the armchair. And this is just bad psychology. So a lot of naturalist accounts are just crap psychology.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me a little bit of, sorry, would you have something more to say on that?
I'm going to talk for a super long period of time, but I do have more to say on that. Like, how can it be unintelligible and false thing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so there's going to be these views that I would say are just trivial, and that would be like Sam Harris more realism. Then you're going to have ones that I think are false, and that's going to be like divine command theory, like where if I don't care, like if someone wants to say some versions of divine command theory are realist and some are anti-realist, so I don't care about that. So let's just assume there's some divine command theory that's presumed to be realist in nature or something like that. There's going to be just an error theory for some of these things. So moral facts are facts about what God commands. God doesn't exist, so all moral facts are false. Like, that seems perfectly fine to me. It's not like that God commands something isn't unintelligible, so it's false. So that would be just false, and maybe not trivial if they try to get, but that probably in order it's going to have some funky element that I might consider to be unintelligible as well. But we could say at least an element of the moral claim is false, which is that to the extent that moral claims presuppose the existence of God and God doesn't exist, they're implicitly committed to something false. So you could get an error theory out of that. But then you get to the final category, this unintelligible category. What I would say about those sort of accounts is I would go back to this Elaine Vital sort of thing. So let's say you wanted to, so it used to be that some people, and I don't even know exactly if this historical narrative is accurate, but let's just suppose it's the 1600s and people think that there is some fundamental metaphysical difference between living and non-living things that distinguishes the living from the non-living. They have some vital essence, living things, that non-living things don't have. Now, what happens when scientists come along? Well, we did all the biology and the chemistry and the physics to understand everything there is to say about the biology of like organic matter, and it just turns out it's just inorganic. It's just living things are non-living things arranged living wise. Like, it's just an arrangement of the same mundane stuff everything else is composed of. There is, like, we at the end of the day, we have no need to posit a vital essence. Now, if you ask someone what a vital essence is, they can say something that's like semi-intelligible. It's some property that is essential and like to living things that distinguishes them from non-living things. I kind of get what they're saying. I kind of don't. Like, what is it? It has the term is serving some role, but it doesn't have any substantive content. Like, okay, what is that property? Oh, it just is the distinguishing property. So in a certain sense, it's partially intelligible, and then in a certain sense it's not. The reason I would say that there is no such thing as a vital force is because it's superfluous, and the best explanation of the distinction between living and non-living things just points to some reductive account of their physical properties, like arranged in the proper way. We have no need to suppose it. So I would say that there is no vital force or no essence to living things, because there's no need to posit that in our best account of the way that the world is. So, like, we just throw it out. So I'd say it's false. Now, if the person continue to insist we have it, and you ask them what they mean and they can't explain what they mean, now I'm going to start to think that that person is confused and they're talking gibberish. I don't see a conflict between those two things. That whatever they're talking about doesn't appear to exist. Like, we don't need it to explain anything. And to the extent that they're trying to explain what they mean, it looks like they might be caught in a web of vacuous, empty terminology. So I don't see a conflict there. If there is one, it's not obvious to me. I don't see a contradiction in that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that they're literally not saying anything, then it is going to be true that it doesn't make sense to say that what they're supposing exists doesn't exist, because they're not supposing that something exists, right? But you could think that maybe they are meaning something or saying something substantive, but you just have no idea what that is. But still think there's some reason to think that whatever it is that they're supposing exists doesn't exist, or is that partly what you're getting at? Or
yeah, it's gonna, and this is what I was trying to get at there, where I think I didn't give a very good response, is that it's going to depend on the specifics. It's going to depend on what the realist says. So some realists might say things where I think that the topic in question is sort of conceptually closed, where we understand the relevant types of concepts well enough to know that what they're saying is self-contradictory. And in that case, it would be a bit like saying that there's, someone's saying that they believe in square circles. Now, that ends up, is the idea of a square circle unintelligible? Well, I never gave a full account of what exactly I mean by unintelligible, and I'm not sure I can give a complete account. Like, I'm not going to give this full, like, it would take an essay, and maybe it would be a shitty essay if I wrote it. I'm not an expert on this, but like, there aren't square circles. Square circle, that's a nonsense idea. There couldn't be such a thing. Someone that insisted there were square circles would clearly be confused. Like, we could say all those sorts of things, and I'm perfectly comfortable saying those things. Whatever someone wants to say about unintelligibility. But, okay, so I can, in a certain sense, it's intelligible. So, what would they say? There's like a line that's like all points in the line are equidistant from some center point, or however the hell you define a circle. But also it has 4 equal sides that form right angles. Like that's an object that has both those properties. Well, that's nonsense. There's no such thing that's like that, and nor could there be, because it has contradictory properties. So in a certain sense, can I understand? Is that intelligible, that there's something can have 4 sides and not have 4 sides? Kind of. Could it have both of those simultaneously? No, that doesn't strike me as intelligible. So sometimes when moral realists are talking, it seems like they're referring to concepts like that. I think the idea of a stance-independent evaluative fact is like that. It's like someone saying something is tasty independent of how it tastes. That just strikes me as like self-contradictory. For something to be tasty just is for it to be tasty relative to some standard of taste. So it's like someone, the closest example I could give would be to extract the indexicality of something that's like clearly indexical, like the sentence, I am facing north. You can imagine someone saying, I am non-indexically facing north. Like, I'm facing north independent of the direction I'm facing. What the hell could that possibly mean? Like, I understand all the words in that sentence, but it's just self-contradictory. So that, I would say, that's unintelligible. That's nonsense. And that's what a lot of moral claims seem like to me. Like, if someone says, you ought not to torture babies for fun, independent of your goals, standards, or values, it strikes me as self-contradictory in that sense. But then you have stuff like, you have a reason to not torture babies for fun. In that case, yeah, it actually sounds to me like that might just be just empty. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Because if you ask the person what they mean by that, and this is another thing, they'll say, well, it means it counts in favor of doing that. And then if you question them on that, they'll go, oh, now you're going too far. Well, hold on. If you ask someone what's a fluble, and then they say it's a zooble, and you go, what's a zooble? And they go, oh, now you're getting too far. Well, why the hell did you say it's a zooble? That never meant anything in the first place. So it's like they have like a 2-layer defense for their Mott and Bailey or something. And like, if you get past one Mott, they just go to another Mott. And then if you press, they go to the Bailey. Like, what are they doing there? What the hell is that it counts in favor stuff? I don't know what they're trying to do with that. That is no more illuminating than you have a reason. So they might say, you have a reason to not torture babies for fun. Okay, what does it mean that I have a reason? Well, it means the fact that torturing babies for fun would like cause them suffering counts in favor of you not doing it. Seriously, what that they don't think they have any obligation to explain what on earth they're talking about? Counts in favor. Counts in favor? How? How does it count in favor? What does that mean? I don't have to explain that. We get it. That's really, really weird. That's a very weird thing for people to do. I don't know what they're talking about. What it counts in favor? How? I don't know what that means. Maybe it means something and they're not able to explain it. But, this isn't like a 5-year-old going into a mathematics department and saying, I don't understand prime numbers. How can numbers be prime or whatever? I've studied this topic for a long time. A quarter of the people in the field don't accept moral realism for whatever reason. Maybe they don't accept it for the same reasons as I do. But if these are the kinds of things where if you had the concept of it, it would be really weird to say, I have the concept, but it's also like not true. So I want to talk to other anti-realists. And maybe it's another point I should have stressed. If you look at like the Schroeder review of Parfit's On What Matters, he points out that according to Parfit, lots of people that are dominant in the field of metaethics don't have the relevant kinds of concepts. He says Simon Blackburn doesn't. Blackburn's probably like top 3 for most influential meta-ethicists that are still around. I'm in good company. There's lots of other anti-realists that say they don't know what the hell Parfit is talking about with these external reasons, or at least Parfit thinks they don't understand it. So, I'm not the only one. And so we have super smart people that have spent their lives studying this topic that literally don't understand what people are talking about. I don't think that's common in other fields, especially in the sciences.
We should get this guy to talk to Zach, because Zach will say shit like it counts in favor.
I would like him to talk to Zach, but you know who else I'd like him to talk to is Akil. Because Akil has a robust realist view, although I haven't seen him make arguments for it, right? He argues for something that's compatible with modest realism or relativism. But he's like leagues above these clowns that Lance is talking to, like humor. So it would be very interesting for him to deal with somebody who's actually got an interesting position, rather than this intuitionist nonsense.
I did want to say, by the way, Simon Blackburn is going to be coming on the channel in a few weeks, so that'll be interesting.
He's very. I mean, I don't share his views, but he's a very good speaker, very interesting.
Yeah. So part of Akil's view is that things have in them various value properties, and in some way we're able to perceive those properties. We see the value in a particular thing, although it's not seeing as in sight. It's or perhaps sight is involved, but it's some sort of value sense, I guess. And that then is what we're saying when we say that something is valuable, is that it has that property and we've perceived it as having that property. Is that kind of the part of the idea?
I think that's right. Did that sound right to you?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
Lance, do you understand, or did you hear that, or did you understand that?
Yeah. So I haven't read enough. So I do know Preston Werner is one proponent of moral perceptualism, and that's what this sounds like. This idea that we perceive moral facts. My initial reaction to that is that just sounds totally batshit crazy. If you know, I sometimes I just want to say what I really think, and that sounds batshit crazy to me. I don't know what on earth it could possibly mean to see a moral fact, but I'm willing to hear them out. And I haven't directly read this literature. I've just heard about these ideas, and there's always more I could be reading.
Yeah, Detroyer or Danny should set up a conversation between Akil and, because I think it would be good, because I actually share Akil's metaphysical views, but I don't share his view on robust realism. And I'd like to see somebody press him on it. And so you're very, you seem like you're very tenacious. So I think you'd be a good foil to sort of press him on it.
Yeah, it might be the sort of thing I'd want to read about before. Like I have a couple papers by Werner that I would probably have to read.
Yeah.
I'll have to dig around the internet and see if there's some good stuff on this, and maybe some discussions. I do know there's a podcast episode with Werner on moral perceptualism that I should probably listen to. Yeah, most of the stuff I've been dealing with over the past few years hasn't even been a lot of the work in metaethics. I've read a little bit on companions of guilt arguments and evolutionary debunking arguments. Most of the stuff I've been reading is actually like psychology method stuff, because most of my work is actually on the empirical research on what non-philosophers think about these issues. And my interest in that became a lot more methodological. So I'm not as read up on some of this as I suspect some of you might be in specific sub areas. So, I haven't read a lot of constructivism. I haven't read a lot of views that sort of slip between the cracks of the people that are making the most noises on the internet. And maybe the people that are making the most noises, are not the best people to be talking to. So it could be that there are more interesting realist views out there, and that I should engage with these people. If there are, though, I'm not seeing them a whole lot online.
Jack, look at my desk.
Yeah, I'm gonna encourage Danny to set that up.
Okay. And I talked to Zach yesterday. I'll ask, because Zach and I correspond often now. So I'll ask him if he's interested in talking to Lance too.
By the way, Lance, Dog sent you a DM. I don't know if you know the app well enough to know that how to see your DMs on this app, but it's if you go to the what's called the back channel, it's probably under requests. So you have to click on the request tab, and then you'll see it. Maybe Detroyer can explain where because you're not actually using the telephone version, right? So
Yeah,
some kind of simulator. Yeah.
I'm on Club Deck on Windows.
Yeah, I'm using Club Deck too.
Can you tell him how to access his DMs in the back channel and how to access requests?
I think if you go to the top bar, you'll see looks like a paper airplane. If you click on that, and then it should open the back channel and it says either chats or requests. You should have one from Dog or Mr. Dog or whatever his name is.
I don't see one. Oh, maybe I see it.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, because it would have been all for the best if you didn't see it, but considering that it's Dog that sent it to you, but what can you do?
I don't know who they are. Is there a reason people are reluctant to share their comments?
Well, Dog is just a gibberish generator. So.
I'm partially just joking, but Dog does have, you could say, a sketchy reputation.
It will. I'll have a look at the message. It's very long, so I don't think I'm going to read that now.
Yeah, that's exactly what he does all the fucking time. Listen, it's never going to stop. If you don't block this guy, it's just going to always happen. You're just going to have to fucking block him.
Probably for the best to just throw the message in the trash, you know?
Well, I'll have a look at it. Yeah, generally speaking, I'll read people's messages unless it's like, something outlandish or threatening or something. Like if someone's like, "I'm gonna kill your family," like, okay,
well, I wouldn't rule any of that out when it comes to Dog, but since I haven't read the message, I can't, say whether.
It looks sincere and well-meaning, no problem.
Okay.
I'm gonna go check on something, but I can hear, but I won't be talking for about a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would also be happy to host Lance and Akil if you wanted, or
Just for us getting jealous of Danny.
I don't mind if Danny wants to do it. I think Eddie was talking about potentially hosting Lance talking with T-Jump. That is probably not a conversation that I would want to host.
Why waste his time? Just get him to talk to Zach, because that would be hilarious.
You said why waste his time and then get him to talk to Zach in the same sentence?
Well, there's like, why waste his time talking to T-Jump? Because that's not even going to be entertaining. But it makes sense to waste his time. It's less, all right, let's say, maybe him personally, it's a waste of time, but it's not a waste of any of our times for him to talk to Zach, because then he just annoys Zach, which is going to be very enjoyable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Why would that be the?
Which part? Which part? Why would which part be the case?
Why would it make sense for me to talk to Zach?
Oh, because it would be hilarious having you challenge him, because he says a lot of the same gibberish that you get frustrated by.
Yeah, although Zach is very nice though, so he's not gonna get combative, I don't think.
No, he would never do that.
I'm not sure how much I am enjoying doing this, to be honest.
That's what I was thinking.
My attitude about moral realism, like, I think the arguments are really bad, and I think that there are practical problems to solve in the world, and I think we're not solving them. I don't think like all the moral realists, if you could talk them out of moral realism, are suddenly going to become the most practical and useful people in the world. But I see it as symptomatic of it's just spinning its wheels and people, building this house of cards that it's just jargon heaped on top of jargon and concepts all floating in this ethereal realm that they're not solving any problem. They're not producing a product for the world. I don't see much coming out of philosophy that seems to be of value to me, and it's making me increasingly pessimistic. I'm increasingly thinking like Wittgenstein is right. I'm starting to advocate something I'm calling like exo-philosophy. Like, if you really want to do philosophy, you should probably go ahead and do what you want, but like maybe go get trained in another field. And I think a lot of people that get trained in other fields may be able to contribute to philosophy better than people that get trained in philosophy. My own training in philosophy was just like, here's what Aristotle said, here's what Kant said, here's what Hume said. Read it, read it, read it. These people are gods, and how, you could critique them, but do it within the rules. And I just want to toss half that shit out and say there's a better way to do philosophy, and it's more ahistorical, it's more empirically oriented. It's very much like, I would say, like post-Quinean, and it incorporates a lot more explicit awareness of cognitive biases and like heuristics and biases research, and of course a lot of that's going to be problematic now as well. But it's I guess I would say more cross-disciplinary and more scientifically savvy than what I'm seeing in a lot of academic philosophy, and I'm just not very happy with the field. And it's a big talent sponge that sucks up people that get, you know, really high standardized test scores. Not that these are not stupid people that are doing this, and all that talent is being squandered on something that strikes me as a real waste.
Yeah, Detroyer.
Yeah, I did want to say that some people sometimes ask what the name of the channel is, like why is it called Friction, and it's a passage from Wittgenstein, right? 107 from the Philosophical Investigations, where he says, the more narrowly we examine actual language, the sharper becomes the conflict between it and our requirement. For the crystalline purity of logic was, of course, not a result of investigation, it was a requirement. The conflict becomes intolerable. The requirement is now in danger of becoming empty. We've got onto slippery ice where there is no friction, and so in a certain sense the conditions are ideal. But also, just because of that, we are unable to walk. We want to walk, so we need friction, back to the rough ground. And I mean, there's some ways to interpret that, but I think part of that, what that is getting at, is that our language should really latch on to the world, right, in a way that should make a difference to what we're saying the world is like, what we expect to interact with, and so on. And a lot of philosophy is constructing these maybe fanciful structures of vocabulary with no real significance for our actually living our lives. And that is sort of part of the problem of philosophy.
Yeah. So, how much time do I really want to spend trying to fight this hydra of confusion? One thing to do is just ignore it and let it die. But the problem is it's not dying. There's still all this useless philosophy, and it's still this talent sponge. It's like just this black hole where people spend their lives coming up with ever more elaborate accounts of like metaphysical theories that are just complete rubbish. They don't do anything. And I've asked some philosophers, why do you do it? And a lot of the answers I get is because they enjoy it. And that just seems like, that's fine, but I don't think I would be satisfied if I couldn't see value in what I was doing. And so I don't know why they do it. I mean, part of it is, I think, a signaling game. You want to be the biggest fish in whatever pond you can land yourself in. And I see a lot of what looks like intellectual pursuits to be, look how smart I am, look how clever I am. So I think signaling is part of it, but it's not in a good situation, and it hasn't been for a long time. And I'm not sure if or how I can contribute to making things any better.
Yeah, I mean, you see, in a way, it's almost disappointing seeing many otherwise great philosophers or thinkers spending their life's work talking about certain issues in theology or certain issues in metaethics and developing these grand systems that are just ridiculous and not grounded in anything reasonably true. I mean, just seems to be like spinning wheels, just it's just a waste of their talents.
Yeah, that's the point I was driving at in my sort of closing remarks in the discussion with Eric, which is, let's say I just stepped back, didn't participate in the discussion, and we just let realists just have at it, just do whatever they want. What would we ever get out of that research? I don't think we would get anything. At the end of the day, let's say all the realists got together, they huddled like, a football team or something. They got together and they said, okay, we figured out that there's objective moral facts. These are the objective moral facts. And they just didn't really have anything to do with what people wanted. People would go, okay.
All right, time to move on with our lives. Like what?
Right. They would just ignore them. So like they're not delivering, but this isn't this case. If astronomers all huddled together and they came back and they said, hey, we looked into a telescope, there's a big asteroid coming to kill us all unless we do something, we would do something. If biologists got together and they said, hey, we came up with this pill, if you take it, you live forever, we would go, shit, that some of us would want to do that. Some of us wouldn't. There'd be all these social problems. Like every other field, they could say shit that matters if it's true. But realists, if they said, hey, it turns out it's objectively wrong for you to whatever, let's say they said it's objectively wrong for, I don't know, to drive on the right side of the road. Would the U.S. government go, shit, I guess we'll switch to the left? No, they just say, well, we don't care about that. That sounds stupid. Go back to your ivory tower. So like, what are realists trying to do? They're not doing, it doesn't seem like the success of their project achieves anything. And this isn't just metaethics. Think of like the whole Gettier problem and the stupid attempt to conceptually analyze knowledge. At the end of the day, what is going to happen if philosophers say, well, these are the conditions for when we know people have knowledge and when they don't? And it turns out that those are the conditions we're already in. So all the things you thought you knew, and all the things you don't think you don't know. But they'll say stuff like it's a normative concept. So like what are they getting at? Like, are you going to conform your epistemic practices to whatever is consistent with how it turns out native English speakers use the word knowledge? Why would you do that?
If I cared about that, I guess.
Right, but no one actually cares about that. And if someone insisted they did, I would just say, I don't believe you. And if they insisted they did believe it, I would stop talking to them. No one cares about that.
If it turned out that what they were getting at was like instrumental to some of my other desires, like if that was a good way of getting at truth and I cared about that, then maybe in that case I might care about it, I guess.
Sure, but then everyone should just be agreeing with Stitch and being a pragmatist about this sort of thing, which is what I think they should be doing. But that's not what they're doing. They would probably all think Stitch is ridiculous and like, oh, that's a fringe view. Oh, pragmatism. So they would just say something like that and they would get back to work on this, like, on figuring out what a word means. And I remember taking courses on epistemology when I was at Tufts and saying, like, what happens if we succeed? Like someone comes along with JTB plus, X, and like they give an X and no one can come up with a counterexample. And we're like, I guess we figured out what knowledge is JTBX. And now, what now? Like nothing follows from that. We figured out what a word is, like what a word means. And then also think about how silly it is that they're trying to figure out what a word means. Presumably what they mean by that is what people mean when they use the word. And they refuse to study what people are doing when they use the word. What? I mean, it's honestly, it's like trying to understand like someone's dietary practices, but refusing to watch them and follow them and see what they eat. What are you doing? Well, most people like pizza, and so they probably like pizza. Like that's stupid. Follow them. So even when philosophers were doing conceptual analysis, what they should have been doing is like cognitive linguistics and neuroscience and cross-cultural like anthropological work to see if do people lexicalize knowledge terms in other languages, and if so, how do they appear in that language? Like, you would think that they would be doing all those things, and they don't do any of those things. And not only do they not do those things, they scoff at them and are think that it's just a waste of time.
Detroyer. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I don't know. It's another topic, but
all right. Well,
I don't know how much. I don't know. Ask. I don't know how much longer you're free to stay, Lance, because we've been here for a bit now. I had another topic from the discussion to bring up. I don't know if you were going to.
Yeah, let's do more of the discussion. Sorry, I keep derailing.
No, it's great.
Okay.
Yeah. So another point that that Eric made had to do with primitive concepts, and he was saying something like, well, we have primitive concepts elsewhere, say in logic or mathematics sometimes. Maybe you mentioned other things I don't recall, but presumably we have some primitive concepts. And we, or at least he and many other realists, claims to have these primitive normative concepts. And, you not understanding it isn't a good argument against it. I mean, what do you think about what he had to say there about?
Yeah, so you've got that friction quote, and this is something I would want to say, and I think I maybe undersold just how disanalogous math and logic are to morality. So take something like math. Well, first we'll start with chess. So there is a publicly available way to find out if someone is better or worse than you in chess. If they checkmate you, they're better than you, like consistently. We could publicly check that. So there are facts about who is better and worse at chess. And those facts are not just, no one's going to do phenomenal conservatism for who's better or worse at chess. It's public. Math is not just the same way, but like math is completely fundamental to all contemporary scientific practice, to the development and utilization of all of our technology. If you want to say math is a bunch of primitive concepts, okay. And if he was trying to make this move where he said, my only criterion for something being meaningless is if it's a bunch of mutually interdefining terms and concepts. So is math, and so my standards are bad because math, isn't a bunch of false nonsense. And what I was trying to convey is that that's not my only criterion. My other criterion is, where does the theoretical rubber hit the practical road? Well, if you want the best example on the freaking planet of something that has practical value, math. Like, it's not even like, math is kind of useful, and then the question is morality useful? It's like the most useful thing. What do I like? Okay, statistics. So all of our scientific research that involves quantitative analysis relies on math. Computers rely on math. Planes, boats, cars, engineering, medicine. I don't like making glass, probably logistics, finance, taxes, how governments operate, basic shit that you do every day when you go to the store. How we use money relies on math. Like, math is so integral to the practical everyday function of our lives and is so useful. First of all, I don't give a shit if it's true or false. It's useful. And, if someone wants to say, but I'm a mathematical anti-realist and like math is just this language. Okay, well, it's a very useful one. How is morality useful? It doesn't have that comparable value. But the second is that just is part of my criteria for whether something is like real, is whether it figures into our explanations, it's useful in doing things, it helps us make predictions, it has some sort of practical value in the way that we see and construct and interact with the world, and is useful in making decisions and pursuing our goals. Math is an incredible example of this. You can make something similar for logic. It's going to be useful in like computer programming, and that's certainly useful in blah, blah, blah. It's going to be the same thing. Now morality. Now what do I do with these stance-independent reasons? Nothing. They don't do anything. They have nothing to do with what I want, and they have no practical value. So, like, what if someone wants to say you accept these other primitive concepts? Okay, sure, I accept other primitive concepts to the extent that they're useful. I don't even know if I'd just say that they're true but unanalyzable. I might just be content with saying they're useful. independent of whether they're true. But even if I wanted to say that they're true, maybe I would just incorporate into my conception of their being true some additional features beyond their mutual interdefinability, but something about their sort of practical applicability. And like this isn't available for the moral realist with respect to the normative facts.
If someone were to say that, well, moral discourse at least is quite useful, maybe because it helps us to, I don't know, maybe convince people to act in certain ways, guide behavior, and so forth. But that's not to say that moral discourse, employing it requires having these primitive concepts or making these meta-ethical presuppositions, right? So is that something you would say on that?
Right.
Or?
Yeah. That's. I would just say yeah, but the fact, to the extent that moral discourse is useful, if it is, we don't need to appeal to stance-independent moral facts.
Right.
Jack, did you see that screenshot I sent you of what Vitaly said about moral realism? I didn't say it about moral realism. He said moral realists are the biggest immoral pieces of shit in my
Oh,
experience.
yeah. I didn't realize that was Vitaly. Yeah, there are some exceptions to that, though. Like Parfit was actually extremely nice. Roche for Landau seems extremely nice.
He was listening to Chomsky and he was getting pissed because Chomsky is a moral realist.
Where did Chomsky say he's a moral realist?
I think I don't know. He listens to political stuff like all day, so I'm not sure where he probably said that, something that like implies someone was probably asking him some skeptical moral question or something like that. I don't know. I can ask him.
Okay, yeah, I'd be curious. I haven't heard that before. I did hear in a podcast, Peter Singer has now become a moral realist, and I found that pretty disappointing.
Yeah, it was because of Parfit's book on what matters
Yeah,
that
which
Singer
has no
changed
good
his
arguments.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I can't remember exactly what Singer cited, but he's like, and Parfit pointed out that it really is wrong to like torture puppies or whatever the heck it was, and he's like, and then I was like, he was right. Like it wasn't some kind of sophisticated maneuver. It's like the kind of ridiculous, lame appeal that like a Christian would knock on your door and say, "Have you ever considered that you sin a lot?" And then you're like, "Oh shit, I didn't realize I need Jesus." Like it was just something that vacuous. There's just no substance to Singer's rationale for why he became a realist.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
So either there's more to it, or I don't know what happened. But I haven't seen too many converts to moral realism. But to the extent that someone is had some sort of conversion, I've never heard a good reason for why.
He said that I asked him this question. He said that he condemned moral relativism. I guess it's not exactly the same thing, but
Who?
that's sort of where he got the implication.
He's talking about Chomsky.
Chomsky's a relative.
No, Chomsky condemns relativism.
Oh, what does he give reasons why he condemns relativism?
I don't know. I'll find. My friend's going to send me that video, and then I'll forward it to you when he sends it.
Yeah, a lot of people when they're critical of relativism, they impute additional normative content onto what the relativist is committed to that's not technically a feature of meta-ethical relativism. So I would suspect that that's the case because disputing relativism as a meta-ethical theory seems a bit weak. So I mean, like condemning it, like saying that it's like bad to be a relativist. That's just weird because your meta-ethics are independent of your substantive normative standards. So I could be a relativist and still have all the exact same moral standards he had.
Right. I sent the link. It's I think it's time stamped at that time. So
I got. I'm listening to it now.
Detroyer, I sent you another question from.
Yeah, did we have more stuff to say about the
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's something else from that you wanted to touch on. I'm trying to think of it. Maybe you had something.
Yeah, I addressed a lot of what I wanted to address. I think that one of my bigger concerns is how to address this problem of realists. I think now that the empirical evidence is really just not backing the claim that realism is like the common sense view of the people, that realists are going to lean more heavily on the Phil papers data, showing that they have a slight majority, and it's going to rely more extensively on the like expertise defense, which is discussed in experimental philosophy, which is like the reason we shouldn't care about like folk intuitions is because philosophers have like expert intuitions about this matter, and that's just going to be a very annoying battle to have to wage because I have to go after sort of fundamental like what philosophers are doing and why we shouldn't regard their judgments about whether moral realism is true or not as especially probative of whether it is true. And that just becomes this whole annoying dispute because philosophers are going to say, oh, well, we have a certain type of expertise and philosophical reasoning, and that allows us to be more reliable judges than ordinary people. And so, to the extent that the majority of us favor a particular position, that's good evidence of the position. Arguing against that is hard. Like, you have to start critiquing the entire field and like how they arrive at their conclusions and the methods that they use, and that troubles me.
We should send Lance that debate.org, Jack, the one, the XY argument against moral
Yeah,
realism. We should send, because there are some salient points about the majority of philosopher thing there.
right.
Yeah, if there's something to consider there, I would like to consider it. Uh, I some of the standard points I make, and it's something that Eric anticipated and talked about because he did a little prep. He was reading the stuff that I say on Facebook, which is where I do most of the discussions about this. Maybe a weird place to do it, but that's where it happens. Uh, I emphasize that the people that end up getting trained in philosophy are demographically from a very narrow subset of the world's population. It's typically it's not that all of these factors matter that much, but it's mostly people that are more on the affluent side of things. They're mostly men, but they're also just primarily people from like weird culture. So Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and that's going to be the big driving force. Primarily, is that they come from a particular socio-political background and cultural background, and that can influence the way that they think and talk about things. But it's not just that; it's also that philosophers are all trained in the same traditions. And a point you could make is, if you had 100 independent witnesses of an event that never spoke or saw to each other at all, they're all in like sealed boxes, and they all watched an event in the center of an arena from different boxes, and they couldn't interact with one another. And they asked them all what they saw, and all 100 of them agreed on what they saw. They all said, we saw a blue elephant walk across the room. Every single one said that. Good evidence that a blue elephant walked across the room. But if they're all friends and they all went to the same school, they all learned the same things, and they all had the chance to interact with one another, not just for a few minutes before you ask them what they all saw, but for hours, you're going to the same thing that's going to happen if you capture two criminals that had time to organize a lie. They're going to tell the same lie or the same falsehood. So philosophers they're not independent judges that all mutually corroborate one another's judgments. The fact that 62% endorse moral realism, well, they're trained on the same methods, they read the same texts, they're follow the same trends, they all talk to one another, they don't talk to other people, they're psychologically idiosyncratic. There's all these reasons why homogeneity and comparative consensus among philosophers might just be due to social, cultural, and other sorts of factors that just have very little to do with it, them thinking that because it's true. And I think we should consider that first and look for those sorts of explanations before we think, yeah, most of them think that because they're right.
I sent you that thread. It's it's an argument between a moral realist and a moral anti-realist. But I mean, Jack was one of the participants who crafted the responses for the moral anti-realist. But there is some point, I think, in the third reply arguing against moral realism that has to do with majority of philosophers being moral realists.
Yeah, I'd want to hear some of the details. Did someone already send that to me?
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Yeah, it looks like they did. Okay, this is the debate.org thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And what am I looking at here?
Well, the whole dialectic is just good to read it anyway, but it's just a back and forth. The user pulchritudinous is the one that's arguing against moral realism, and then this other guy, Nikash, is arguing for. I think if you look at the third response, oh wow, this might not be the right one. It's like, I don't know. It's weird on my phone. Maybe let me see. Hold on. Let me look at the.
The debate is called "Are There Moral Facts?"
Yeah, that's what he's
Yeah, I
looking
think
at.
what you linked took me straight to the comments, but there's like this thing that says debate rounds 4. Is that what I should be looking at?
Yeah, yeah. Let me just. I think I'll send you the first one because maybe I just. Yeah, I sent you directly to the. I didn't mean to do that. It should just be this one.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that looks right. Also, you asked me to link a paper from like a couple weeks ago, so sorry, I didn't know how to check messages then. Do you remember what the paper was by chance?
No, I can't remember. That's fine.
Okay.
All right. I don't know. I probably have to be going pretty soon. I don't know if you want to wrap up or if you want to keep going.
Yeah,
Or
let's wrap up because I have dinner that's been waiting there for like an hour and a half, so I should probably go eat.
No, it's been great chatting with you about this, and great having you on. I think we were good for this Friday, right? Or I think we agreed Friday at 5.
Yeah, I think so. You know what? I might want to put that off because I'm supposed to do a podcast recording on Saturday, and I should probably be like fresh and rested for that instead of
Oh,
wearing
fair.
myself out this week.
Yeah, fair enough.
So maybe
Maybe next week.
we'll email and figure it out. But yeah, sooner rather than later. So
Sure.
next week is probably good.
All right, sounds good.
All right, cool. I'm gonna go get dinner. Yeah, sorry if I didn't answer any questions. I'm finding this habit when I come in here that I have so much to say that I never get to say, but I just keep saying stuff. So feel free for people. You could just jump in and say, "Shut the hell up!" Like, move on to the next question. I'm happy to do that.
I think no, it was great. I think in a roundabout way we kind of did cover a lot of the discussion points. So plus a lot of other things.
I found that part in that it's ethicists, like a response to the ethicist's claim. It says, I never said that anti-realists aren't the minority. I questioned its implications. Pro ignored that there's no appeal to authority in philosophy, and that the survey included more than just robust realism in the realism category, the former being a topic at hand. Pro thinks I said moral anti-realism is prima facie self-evident, but I never claimed this. I was addressing Pro's citation of the survey as evidence of the self-evident nature of moral realism. If it's self-evident, it wouldn't be the case that 20+% of ethicists would be anti-realists. Given the self-evidence of 2 + 2 = 4, one wouldn't expect 20% of mathematicians to deny that 2 + 2 = 4. Since 20+% of ethicists are anti-realists, Pro has given evidence that moral realism isn't self-evident, not the other way around.
Yeah, so that's a good point for stronger claims, which would be like that moral realism is self-evident. I don't know that a lot of realists like Humer would say that it's self-evident. They might just say that it's intuitively plausible to like, but it's not
To
self-evident,
him, at
and they would
least.
have some sort of thing they would have to say. So yeah, I think that point is sufficient to dispense with stronger claims about the intuitiveness of moral realism, but not more modest ones that I think most realists would rely on. It's still a feather in the cap for anti-realists, though.
Someone who knows Clubhouse.
Oh, I was just to say, 25% of experts in a field endorsing something is a pretty big deal. If you want to say that, if T-Jump wants to say something like there's a consensus in favor of moral realism, 62% versus 25 is not a consensus. It's not anything anyone would call, like, if 25% of physicists didn't believe in dark matter, it would be weird to just say, like, physicists agree that there's dark matter. No, they don't.
What is it like in the latest field paper survey? It's like 70% lean atheist. Does that mean that is that atheism being a like consensus among philosophers? Like,
yeah, this is also a point that I made to Matthew when I had my discussion with him. And again, it's the kind of case where I make a point, and instead of the realists going, "Oh shit, like that's a serious problem," they're like, "Yep, that's a point on your tally." And it's like, well, no, it's not like every time someone makes a point, it's worth 1 point. This is a very serious problem. So, Matthew, in that discussion, leaned very heavily on the fact that 62% of philosophers are moral realists, while a full 25% are anti-realists. But he's also a utilitarian, and less than a third of philosophers endorse utilitarianism, and 2/3 endorse virtue theory or deontology. So they're like explicitly rejecting consequentialism. And then out of those consequentialists, you're going to only have a subset that are utilitarians, and out of those, only a subset are going to endorse like whatever version he does, which is
some ideal observer thing, or what was he saying?
Yeah, well, that would be like his meta-ethical views or something.
Oh,
but
true.
If he ends up being like a classical utilitarian, what proportion of philosophers endorse classical utilitarianism? 5%? So there seems to be an overwhelming consensus against his view in that regard, much greater than there is in favor of moral realism. That seems like a very serious problem for him. This just seems like a big deal. I bet the sample size is also larger for that. And then you're going to have other issues because part of his basis for thinking that utilitarianism is correct is Josh Green's dual process model of moral cognition. What proportion of philosophers, if you survey them, would think that that's compelling evidence that utilitarianism is the correct moral theory? Because if only 5% are utilitarians, I bet it's smaller than that. So, like, there is something approximating like the consensus among climatologists for anthropogenic climate change in favor of Josh Green's dual process model of moral cognition is not compelling evidence of moral realism, of utilitarianism. That's a problem. So, for people that want to dip into the field paper survey to say that consensus favors their view, they seem to do so in a highly selective way that just looks like very obvious cherry picking.
Yeah. Wait, does someone who knows more about Clubhouse, how do I save like a replay or something? Is that something?
It does it automatically, bro. Just don't turn it off.
On my computer?
On Clubhouse, dog. All this shit is in a fucking database. What are you talking about?
The question is, how do I save it to my computer?
I don't know how people do that. I don't know if they download it or if they just like screen record the playback.
Oh, whatever.
Sean should know. Sean, wait, you want to invite Sean up? Sean, are you here?
Sure.
It doesn't do it automatically. You have to click those 3 little dots, click save replay, and then the only way you'll be able to transfer it, and then you have to go back and access it in your profile, and then maybe you can download it.
Can that only be done after the room has been closed?
No, you can do it. You have to do it before the room is closed.
You have to do it before the room is closed. Okay, so you say there's 3 dots.
You could like do it right now. Yeah.
Where are the dots? I don't see it. I mean, I'm on Club Deck, so I don't know if that makes a difference.
I mean, yeah, Club Deck is like, I don't know what the fuck Club Deck does. This is a phone.
There's shit on you to try.
It's a phone app, but it's a thing that does it. It's a Windows application. Club Deck is a Windows application that will do it.
I think anybody who would use the Club Deck version is just an asshole.
Right.
Well, Galdis uses it, so there's some evidence there, right?
She uses the desktop version, the simulator.
Well, she did it because she wanted to record you.
She wanted to record me? What was I saying?
Well, she's obsessed with you.
She is?
Yeah, she like one thing that she wants like more than anything is just to have like an archive of Jack saying.
Oh, really? Why? She's always trying to. She wants me to fail, so that's sort of weird. Like you make it sound like she's a fan, but she's like rooting for me to fail.
She is a fan. She's your
Huh?
biggest fan. She's your biggest fan.
But why does she root for me to fail then? she.
Well, I don't. When does she
She
do
wants
that?
to lose. What did you say?
When does she do that?
Well, I mean, she wants. She would be. Do you think? Don't you think Godless would be delighted if I like were like destroyed in a debate?
Yeah, but that's just like if you even if you're like a fan of some guy, like sometimes you want to see the supervillain win.
Okay.
It makes it more exciting if you lose.
So she just has this archive of recordings. She doesn't even do anything with them.
Well, she plans to record more. I mean, she kind of fell out of it, but she wants to. She just wants like her YouTube channel to be an archive of.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Well, there are a lot of people who apparently are interested in that content because people tell me all the time that they go through, they like search my name on YouTube, and I've listened to like all my debates.
Detroyer, what was the reason that you didn't tell those Muslims that they were reifying sets?
Oh, because I thought their point was better made as a point about composition. So that was maybe just charitable, but that's the way I responded to that.
Well, that's in a way kind of steel manning their argument, which seems fair. You know,
Right.
it'd be better to make it about composites than about sets.
Right, and I think I said as much, right?
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
Well, like it's a composite object that has two parts.
Yeah, because if they want to say, they were saying something like, "Oh, but look, you can't suppose that there are only two objects that exist here because there is also the set of them, and that's another thing." Well, someone could say, "Well, I don't believe that sets are objects, and so, or that's." Or they're not objects over and above their members, and so I don't accept that. Well, given maybe contestable mereological assumptions, those two objects compose a third, right? A larger one that includes both of them as parts, and that could serve, the role in their argument that they wanted of the set, right? That there's something else in addition to those two objects.
Oh, I
Without
didn't even have
with
the
a
capacity to like think about. I just that view didn't even occur to me just because my presumption of mereological anti-realism is so firm, So it just didn't even. I didn't even.
okay. Well, the point of that would maybe be that that mereological assumption is at least less controversial than the mathematical one, about sets being objects in their own right.
I would have just said you guys are reifying sets, and then I would have like linked to the.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's what Dog said.
That's what Dog said. Yeah, Dog
Yeah,
said
and that's
that
fair.
translation.
It's just that I thought their point could get by with this compositional approach instead of the set
Yeah,
approach.
but I think what Detroyer would say is that it's going to be